Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for the rest of you. It is me, your host, Q, for Bitcoin Magazine Live. We're coming to you straight out of Mexico, and we have a special guest coming from all the way in Rwanda, Youssef. Thank you so much for coming back with us. I know you've been doing a lot of work out there with Built with Bitcoin, as well as spending some time in El Salvador. Before we start chatting, though, I want to share a video that Built with Bitcoin put together with some of the work that they've been doing for the last few months. We're going to roll that and we'll dive right in with Youssef. Welcome back, guys. And I'm really excited to introduce yet again Youssef, who's joining us all the way from Rwanda, as well as our colleague, Eric. I'm never going to pronounce your last name properly live. I'm so sorry, man. One day I'll get it right. But thank you both for joining us, man. How you guys doing?
Living the dream here over in Baltimore, Maryland. Not in Mexico, but, maybe soon. How about you, Yusuf? What's going on?
I'm doing well. Thank you all for having me. I'm here in Rwanda. We're doing an amazing work here on the ground. I wish you all can be here and join us. But the work that we're doing in El Salvador is equally as important. I'm super excited to talk about our work together with Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin Black Friday.
Well, for those of our viewers who maybe haven't had a chance to see some of the past interviews when you've joined us, or missed all the spaces together, or didn't see any of the advertising, you really were under a rock if you missed some of the stuff, guys. But give us a little bit of background on Built with Bitcoin.
Yeah, man. 6 years ago, I was running a traditional fiat NGO that I had started called Zamzam Water, and we were building water wells around the world. And an individual had reached out to us to contribute towards a orphan school project that I was building in my mother country of Afghanistan. And the transaction fell through. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, thank you so much for your anticipated contribution. Is there another form of payment for us to be able to process this? And he responded with me, do you accept Bitcoin? And I had absolutely no idea what Bitcoin was. And this is in 2016, 2017. And so, going back and forth with him, having that peer-to-peer conversation and relationship, I was basically orange pilled over email. And the person on the other side of that email happened to be Ray Youssef, who is the co-founder of our foundation and also the CEO of Paxful. And, building that relationship with him and kind of understanding better directly from him about what Bitcoin is, it truly allowed me to understand that this is what the NGO and philanthropic sector of the world truly needs. It has so many benefits. Why are we not utilizing it better? And so we thought, hey, let's band together. Let's disrupt this traditional, system that happens to be extremely slow, ineffective, inefficient, and make it better. And that's where we came up with Built with Bitcoin Foundation. And 6 years later, we have projects in Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, El Salvador, India, South Africa. And, for us, it's about being able to have this universal adoption of Bitcoin and Bitcoin education to liberate those communities around the world that truly need that financial freedom.
I always love hearing the story of how Ray Youssef orange pilled Youssef. So it's always a fun little meta treat there. But as I mentioned, we spent some time during the holiday season, especially around Thanksgiving, leading up to Christmas, essentially. We at Bitcoin Magazine, we're partnered with Built with Bitcoin for Bitcoin Black Friday, helping to raise some money. Can you share a little bit about where that money went to and the work that you were doing in El Salvador at the top of this year?
Right. We're extremely grateful for a partner like Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin community in general. For us, it was always about finding a clear destination of where these funds are going. And we proposed the idea of this beautiful community called Tasajera Island in El Salvador. And for us, it was more so not just providing this community with resources, but building the relationship and building the trust with them. And for us, it was, we fit like a glove in there. The community members themselves were willing. They were willing to want to be able to learn about Bitcoin. Obviously, we all know about El Salvador and its adoption, and having Bitcoin as legal tender, but what now, right? And that's it's our obligation, it's our duty as Bitcoiners, to create this opportunity for folks to be able to learn more about how to utilize Bitcoin to create a better quality of life for them. So for us, it's not just about pushing projects out. It's about real, tangible relationships with these community members, and that's how we can get to that universal adoption that we all yearn for. And so the very first aspect of the project was to provide a mode of transportation for the community members. They are fairly isolated, and what they needed to do, especially the students traveling back and forth to school, needed to pay up to $3 per day to be able to commute back and forth. And we thought to ourselves, okay, you have a community that doesn't have the necessary financial tools at their disposal, and they're expected to pay up to $3 per day, $15 per week to be able to go to school. How can we create a solution for this problem? And we came up with the Bitcoin boat, and we were able to build the boat from the ground up, be able to provide and stimulate the local economy there, but also be able to create the sense of community by bringing these members and villagers together, and give back to the only local community school that's there. We repainted and repaired the school. We provided laptops and built a tech center for them so they can be connected, because it's not so much about introducing Bitcoin to them, but how are they able to learn more and inform themselves without being connected to the internet. We donated smartphones to the community. So we took a very holistic approach is the point here. We just didn't want to, provide resources for them, but again, have them engaged, have them be part of that process in the conversation. And now every time I go back to El Salvador, if I don't visit Tasajera Island, I feel like disconnected, like I feel as though they're a part of our family. And that's what I love about our work.
It's beautifully said. And I'm about to put on the screen now just the article that was written up by one of our colleagues who had the opportunity to head down to El Salvador with you. And before we kind of dive into that a little bit deeper, I do want to give you the chance to kind of explain a little bit more, because you touch on it a little bit in this explanation of why the rationale behind why you guys needed to build the boat, but you don't just build a boat everywhere you go or find transportation. You do this with every community you guys go into, and you make a point to help them at the ground level and then build up from there. So I'd love to have you share with our viewers maybe some of the work you guys did in Rwanda previously before we talk about what you're doing out there right now too.
Yeah, I mean, everything begins and ends with trust. You have to build trust with a community, and you can't do that by being disingenuous. These communities and these members, they're human beings. They have emotions, they have feelings, they have problems, they have solutions. And so you have to be able to communicate with them properly. And you can't do that without spending time. And time is extremely valuable, right? You can't just throw money or throw sats at a community and expect for it to grow and expect for it to thrive. It takes time. And for us, we have a huge emphasis on being able to build a relationship with this community, right? We want to be able to assimilate ourselves regardless of what location around the world, what language they speak, what tribe they're from, what kind of financial disparity they may or may not have. For us, it's about understanding who they are and not thinking that we know all of the answers or that we have all of the solutions. In fact, they're the ones that can come to us and explain to us that, hey, these are the issues that we're having. How can we work together to find the solution? We don't want communities anywhere around the world to be dependent on us as a foundation. That's not what we are. We are a philanthropic organization where we are thinking long-term, we are thinking sustainably, and we want these individuals from these communities to be financially independent. And that's the key for us. And that takes quite a while, right? It's not as attractive or as sexy because it's not, this Band-Aid that you rip off. It's a very long-term process. But we're willing to be there. We've done this for 6+ years now, and we want to continue to be able to accomplish this work moving forward.
Love that. I think it speaks volumes to the organization of your guys' group and the way you guys continue to be very strategic despite what limited funds you have. You're able to really make a big lasting impact. Um, for those of you who are curious to learn a little bit more, be sure to check out the article talking about Isla Tasahera. Did I pronounce that correctly, Yusef? Tasahera. Be sure to check out that article. We have it up on the screen now. We'll have it up for a little bit longer. But moving on now to a little bit of what you're doing, or I want to hear a little bit about how the community members are going to use this Bitcoin boat, what it means to them, and maybe talk a little bit about like the fact that Bitcoin is accepted on this and so on.
Absolutely. So I want to give a huge shout out to Ryan Freebrink for coming out there and joining us, having this experience of being, firsthand on the ground, his feet in the soil. It was amazing for him to be able to see it. I think it was Ryan's very first time out of the country in a very long time. So to have him be there with us and experience this, I think it was an extremely emotional experience for him. And I hope, there was a level of growth for the both of us. I learned so much from Ryan and I hope vice versa. And for me and us as a foundation, it's extremely important for those that are contributing and supporting our work to be able to be there firsthand, to be able to see it, to not trust what we say, but to verify with our own two eyes. And that's what we kind of call the blockchain of philanthropy within our foundation. It is for folks to be able to see us either vicariously through social media or them themselves, on the ground with us, the work that's actually being done. And the very first school that we ever built, because we heavily focus on education. And this is not just about education in general, but financial literacy and Bitcoin education. And we teach our students at a very young age, not just about Bitcoin, but we want to teach them about money. What does the value of money truly mean? And what can it do for them if they make much more financially responsible decisions? Secondly, what we also do is have financial literacy courses for community members, the parents of these students. Why? Because we want these folks to be financially liberated and to be financially independent. Without that knowledge and those resources, it's just not possible. Whether you give a community access to clean water, access to electricity, build a beautiful structure, educational structure, without the necessary resources for them to be sustainable and maintained, it doesn't make any sense. And so for us, having that education as the backbone, as the four pillars of the foundation itself, figuratively and literally, we know that these individuals will be set up for success. And what happens from there is on them. We give them the freedom to be able to choose and utilize these resources. We don't force anyone to do anything, and we've never forced anyone to use any type of technology. That's not what we believe Bitcoin was made for.
It's very beautifully put and said. It's there for you if you want it, but if you don't want it, that is your choice. We will help you get there, but I can't force you to drink the water. I can just lead you to the well. Um, Eric, I don't know if you want to maybe touch on or share anything about, I know you were much more hands-on in working with the Build with Bitcoin Foundations, and you and Ryan were sort of leading the charge there. Did you want to sort of share any of your experiences in the work that you put together, or just any questions you wanted to ask Yusef?
Yeah, sure. I have a question for Yusef. Geographically, I know particularly Africa, some places like Nigeria, they are very into the peer-to-peer aspect of Bitcoin, whereas somewhere like the island of can't pronounce it, Talahera, they needed some education that went along with it. Do you see the different areas you go into? Is that on-ramp for education? Does it differ a lot? I wonder if you can just dive into that.
Yes, it does differ, and that's a reality for us when we're on the ground, right? We are dealing with communities that don't even have access to electricity, let alone have a smartphone to be able to access Bitcoin or even learn more about it, right? We are working with individuals that, like in Isla Tasahera, for example, when we first went in there and engaged with the community, what we do is we do an assessment, and we kind of want to hear back from them. And what we do is we have surveys and assessment surveys, so to speak. And what we learned was that some of the community members themselves didn't even know how to read or write. They don't even know how to write their own names. So this is the level of education that we're dealing with. Now, of course, that takes time, but imagine when you can just unlock the true potential of an individual by even teaching them how to read or write, so then they thus can be able to utilize Bitcoin or whatever they would like to do. That's an extremely gratifying accomplishment on behalf of our foundation, right? And the people that we're working with. When it comes to education in parts of Africa, specifically in Nigeria, which is extremely innovative and passionate about Bitcoin and its usage, excuse me, where people are 100% living on Bitcoin there that you may not even know about, right? They've like hacked into the system in a way where they were able to find ways to be able to utilize it to their best abilities. This is the beauty about Bitcoin, y'all. It's extremely indiscriminate. It doesn't matter where you're from, what language you speak, what sexuality you are, what gender you are. It has multiple use cases depending on where you are around the world, whether it's for remittances coming in, whether for it's e-commerce, or you want to open up your business, to have borderless payments, whatever it may be. Bitcoin has an avenue for you to be successful, whether you're a community member in Isla Tasajera who needed their child to be able to go to school back and forth without you having to worry about paying for their commute every single day, and then for them to have Bitcoin as a store of value because the dollar is continuously being hit with inflation. Or you have someone in Kenya who has now opened up their business to the rest of the world, right? For us, we just want to be able to be there and provide this resource to them when it comes to the knowledge and education, and what they do with it, it's all on them, right? We want them to have the freedom to make the choice. But I have a front seat to being able to see the true power that Bitcoin possesses. And it's a very privileged seat. I don't take it for granted whatsoever. And, I give absolute acknowledgement and appreciation to Ray Youssef, who's literally taught me everything I know about Bitcoin. And like philanthropy, who would have thought philanthropy? And I don't need to remind y'all the last couple of months how Bitcoin has been utilized, not to get political about anything, but like it is absolutely beautiful to see the true power of Bitcoin, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Ukraine, anywhere in Afghanistan, where my family's from, that was overtaken by the Taliban. Like they don't even have access to banking systems right now, but guess who's winning? It's Bitcoin. And there's Bitcoiners everywhere around the world. It doesn't matter. It's literally in every single country on this planet. And once people are able to kind of fully and truly grasp that concept, man, we're still early. Like we are early, y'all. Like we've been working and doing this for the past 6 years, and yet we still have so much to be able to accomplish, so much to be able to learn from the people on the ground. And I'm excited. Like, oh my God, I want to go and build some more right after this conversation, man. Like, let's do this together.
I mean, you sent chills down my spine just talking about how Bitcoin is changing the world one country, one moment at a time. So I'm with you. Just tell me where to show up and I'll show up with whatever I need to, my dude. Eric, I cut you off. I saw you were ready to ask something else. So dive back in, man.
No, I guess my comment is around the fact that, there's still lots of people on this earth that don't even know how to read or write. So taking it to that level and saying, hey, we have to start here with education and then we can get to Bitcoin eventually. That didn't even cross my mind. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I can only imagine the challenge that is to educate people from that base. So I don't really have a follow-up question, but that just really stood out to me.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that as well too, Eric, the point is that the beauty behind the power of Bitcoin is fully intrinsic for me. Like I have seen people, and not to get emotional on this conversation, but I've experienced and heard the level of frustration of folks of not being able to live their lives freely, right? And for Bitcoin to come in as a beautiful technology with the idea that, hey, you don't need a bank. You have everything right here in the palm of your hand. That's a concept that for some folks is extremely significant. For everyone, it's significant, of course, but imagine the individual that may not know how to read or write. And for them to know that, you know what, I don't need a car to go travel 3 hours one way. to be able to have all of my financial assets here in the palm of my hand. That's an extremely beautiful thing to possess. And especially with what's going on at this very moment in time, where people are becoming political refugees and having to, take all of their money out of the bank, and the lack of security that creates. My family were refugees of Afghanistan in 1980. They came to the United States. My father didn't have anything to bring back with him. And imagine if he was able to bring back, his wealth on a flash drive, and he didn't have to start from zero, right? My father came to the United States and in 40 years filed for bankruptcy not once but twice. Why? Because he was preyed upon by the banking systems, right? Who had predatory practices that singled him out and said, you know what, this individual may not know how to read, may not know how to speak English that well fluently. Let's charge him with, take advantage of his situation. He wants to provide for his family. Let him just charge up these credit cards. That's what my father did. What was his crime? Trying to provide for his family, for my sister and I, right? Like, I wish Bitcoin was there then. I wish I knew the knowledge that I have now to be able to liberate my father, to create a better quality of life for my sister and I. What difference does that have than someone that lives in Rwanda or El Salvador or Iran, right? Or Vietnam? That's the beauty behind Bitcoin. It doesn't matter where you're from, bro. It doesn't matter where you are, right? All you need is a connection. And it's our duty, it's our responsibility as a foundation to be able to bring those together. And I'm ready. We're ready for the challenge, but it's going to take everyone. We can't do this by ourselves. And that's why we're so grateful to Bitcoin Magazine and all of y'all. I love coming on here and talking to you. I'm so privileged and grateful to be on here multiple times. Let's keep this momentum going.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you just touched on is one of the things that speaks very close to me. But all of us here, including our producer, Chris, behind the scenes, like, we were all very fortunate and privileged to live the lives that we did and to be raised in the countries that we grew up in, the families that we had. None of us did anything for that. We didn't take a test to say, oh, you're qualified to be born in the USA or you're going to be born in the Ukraine. Like, we could very well have been spending our weekends covering for shelter or leaving our homes. But instead, like, I was on the beach. Like, I sound like an asshole saying it like that, but I also recognize how privileged I am to have the values that were instilled in me and to have the lifestyle that I have and had growing up. Talk to us a little bit, Yusuf, about the countries that you guys have gone into. What is the value around education in America? And I can only really speak to this from the American perspective, and quite frankly, from a privileged American perspective of an expectation to go to college, a guarantee essentially that there is a school for me, at least until I'm 18, and now in most states until I'm 20. But what does that look like in a place like El Salvador? Is there even school guaranteed until 18?
Right. I mean, I think it comes down to like the core fundamentals of education. And the reason why education is so important to me and it's so important to this foundation is the opportunity that it can provide. That's the number one asset that education can provide someone, is the opportunity. What you do with that opportunity is up to you. So you have the freedom to be able to choose that, right? That's what I love so much about Bitcoin, is that it provides an opportunity for someone to be liberated to make the decisions freely for themselves, right? And so for us, when it comes to education, it's important for us to be able to build the connection and the relationship with those communities. It doesn't matter whether it's El Salvador, whether it's the Philippines, whether it's Kazakhstan, right? It's all about building the relationships with the individuals on the ground there, building the trust with them. For example, tomorrow we're going to be visiting the Bugesera district, which is the epicenter of the genocide in 1994, right? You have a country, a very small country of Rwanda, 8 million plus people at the time. And in 90 days, over 1 million Rwandans were killed by other Rwandans because they were colonized, right? They were made to seem different. They're Hutus versus the Tutsis. The reason why I'm bringing this up is 27 years later, they are now living in a country of peace and prosperity, right? Of course, they have their issues. It's not a utopia here. But we went to the Bugesera district, we connected with the community, and we said to ourselves, hey, not only are we going to bring Bitcoin education, we want to bring a core curriculum of education for the students here, so that they can be liberated to make those decisions themselves. On top of that, to also be able to benefit the parents of the community. So our school systems are not just school systems dedicated to students, they're dedicated to the entire community. That's why our mantra is, we don't just build schools, we build communities, right? And for us to have that core Bitcoin education at the very grassroots level, we're not talking about high level technical aspects. We're talking about functionality. That's what these folks care about. They care about the use case of Bitcoin. How can it make their lives better? And once they find out, 9 times out of 10, they want to know more. They're like sponges. They want to learn more and more and more. And as they're continuing to learn, you continue to build that trust. Why? Because your work and your effort is genuine, right? Every year, we try to make trips to every single school that we build on an annual basis. Why is that so important? Oh, we completed a school, we completed a project, let me wash my hands and go. No, 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 no. For us, it's about quality over quantity. If we can build one school and have an entire community be able to utilize Bitcoin in its best use cases, for its best abilities, if the community chooses to do so, we've already succeeded as a community. I'm not going to sit here and say, we want to do this, we want to do that. No, it's not about the numbers game for us. It's about the quality of the relationship that you're building. That's why peer-to-peer is so important, because that peer-to-peer relationship that we're building on the ground with those communities is an extremely valuable asset to the success. That metric is a success to us as an organization. I hope I answered your question. I go off on tangents. You know me, man.
I love your tangent. Oh, I love your tangents. We're all better and smarter for them. But I want to play a little bit of a thought experiment, not necessarily a thought experiment, but like walk me through. I am an adult, uneducated in El Salvador, in this community. I show up to the school that has been built. What does my curriculum look like as an adult? And then I do want to, after that, ask you, what does it look like for high school age and then below that as well?
Right, great question. And so for us, it's understanding where you are in your curriculum, right? It's understanding about where your place is and what level you are in. It's not about how we feel about it. It's how comfortable are you in your level of engagement when it comes to reading, writing, just literacy in general, right? Math, etc. For us, understanding how we can impact someone with Bitcoin education has to do with their level of want and motivation to be able to learn, right? That's first and foremost, because you cannot dedicate resources towards an individual that becomes complacent and may not want to be able to utilize it. We want people to be engaged. We don't want to force anyone to do anything, right? It's all voluntary. So for them, it's kind of understanding, the first step is understanding the concept of money. Do you know how money works? What does money actually do? Is it a store of value? What kind of asset is it, right? And then you can kind of work on towards what is your own financial level, right? What are the problems that you face on a daily basis? Are these problems able to be solved with Bitcoin? And if so, here are some core curriculum, basic fundamentals about Bitcoin. History of Bitcoin, use cases of Bitcoin, and how you can be onboarded to be able to utilize it on whatever platform you would want. You want to use an exchange, or you want to use a Lightning wallet, you want to use your a cold wallet, whatever it may be. Those things are all extremely advanced. We're not there yet, anywhere near that in El Salvador. Here is one concern that we had when we were working in Isla Tasajera, and I'll give you an example, and it's going to hurt all of your hearts, but we'll talk about it anyways, okay? The first weekend that we went there to work with them, we kind of asked them, what has been your experience with Bitcoin, right? Obviously, it had already been legal tender, this wallet versus this wallet. What is your overall knowledge and experience? $30 worth of Bitcoin was airdropped to this community, to all the Salvadoran citizens, right? What happened was individuals that they named as coyotes came to their island, which is completely isolated from the mainland, obviously, right? And said, hey, this $30 is going to disappear. It has a time limit, right? Because it's not tangible for them. So they didn't understand what it truly was. And I said, if you guys all send this money to us in this wallet, we will go to the mainland, to the capital, and withdraw the funds via the ATM and bring you all cash. And we're going to charge you $10 for this this process. So you have $30 worth of Bitcoin. They take 10, obviously you're left with 20. And guess what happened? This entire community, not the entire community, excuse me, a majority of this community put their funds together, sent it to this wallet for this individual to go and cash it out for them and come back and give it to them. And guess what happened? That guy never came back, right? So this was their first experience with Bitcoin, that this is internet fake, magic money that has a time limit to it, and it primed them to be scammed. So as you can imagine, people were like, do we really want to get involved? Like, do we really want to understand? But then when they saw that we as a foundation came to them not by giving them something on a silver platter, but we wanted them to be part of the conversation. What are your pain points, right? So that curriculum cue that you're talking about is not some general curriculum. You have to fully understand who you're speaking to. You have to understand their language and where they're coming from. It's not about us. It's not about Built with Bitcoin's curriculum. There's unbelievable amounts of information on the internet currently, right? There's not one that's better than the other. It's when you can truly understand who the students are, who the audience is, that's when you can really have impactful curriculum. I hope that answered your question.
It absolutely did, man. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, how did you guys design a school that is candidly better than, I would argue, at least a good majority or a good sizable portion of the American public school system? So thank you for not catering to just one person, or thank you for not catering to the masses and catering it and individualizing it to each person. That is how education should be. You are doing God's work, Youssef. Eric, I'm going to pass the mic off over to you, my friend.
Sure. My question piggybacks on the education aspect. I was wondering, I know a lot of Bitcoin content gets written in English. What's the current status of Bitcoin educational resources for other languages, and where is a lot of the translation needed right now?
This is an absolutely great question. I'm so happy that y'all asked it. But before I answer, I want to emphasize that I have an entire team that stands beside me on the work that I do. The partnerships that we create on the ground with folks. Bitcoin Magazine has been an unbelievable partner with us. The alliances that we've created around the world. I'm here, but there's tons and tons of individuals that deserve to be here as well too. So I just want to, emphasize and acknowledge that. Eric, to your question, localizing the content is extremely important. To be able to have content that's in the native tongue of the communities that we're working with is whether a project is successful or not. I'll give you an example. We were in Kenya just a few days ago, visiting our two schools there. We have a nursery and primary school in Machakos County. And of course, many know that Kiswahili is the spoken language in Kenya, as well as English. But there are different dialects in different communities. We had an individual, Master Gwantai. Gwantai himself came. He writes with Bitcoin Magazine. He's a Kenyan, native Kenyan, who visited the school with us. And it was important for him to be there to represent a part of the Bitcoin community. Shout out to him for making the time to come, because we need the students and the community members in these communities to obviously understand this content. How can they understand it if it's written in English, a language that they don't even understand? Of course, there are folks that speak English in these communities, but maybe they may not be able to read or write it, right? So to your point, Eric, if we want to get to this universal mass adoption that we truly believe that Bitcoin is destined for, we can't do it thinking that it is made for North America, whether that's Mexico when it comes to Spanish or English. There are so many different dialects and languages spoken around the world that even in countries that I work in, I'm not even aware of, right? And that takes a level of expertise and time to accomplish that, right? Who's willing to be able to go through that? There are many initiatives. I think the name of it off the top of my mind, but we had a group of people from, I think it was Exonomia, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, who is actually localizing or attempting to localize Bitcoin education in every African language, in every African country. Like, it's phenomenal, right? This aspect, just in Nigeria, just in Nigeria, you have hundreds of different tribes, hundreds of different dialects, right? Obviously, Hausa is one that many are very well aware of, right? You have millions of people that speak these languages, but Hausa deserves to have its Bitcoin content be written in its native tongue, right? If you have someone in in Rwanda for Kinyarwandan, if you have the different types of dialects for Swahili, Swahili is a spoken language of 150 million people in Africa, right? 150 million people. Kenya, I would say, is probably the second, or maybe even first when it comes to adoption for Bitcoin on the continent itself. Nigeria and Kenya, right? Like, how can we not have material written in that language for people to be able to understand better? Why is it that we expect folks to just understand English, right? What kind of privilege are we coming from as a Bitcoiner in our community to think that everyone just speaks either English or Spanish? That's not the case, right? And so in order for us to get to that mass adoption, we need everyone to be represented, because Bitcoin was made for everyone, for the 100%. Absolutely.
Touch a little bit on, if you don't mind sharing, some of the work you guys are doing right now in Rwanda. I've been following you just all over Africa posting. Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing there and what you were doing leading up to this, please.
Yeah, man, it's beautiful to be able to just come back to the villages and to be able to connect with the community members. Like, there's no like special antidote or magic pill, for anything. For us, it's just being able to sit and listen and learn from them. Every time I come, it doesn't matter if I visit, 10 times per year, I continue to be able to learn from these folks. And that for me is extremely gratifying and satisfying. What we as a team try to do every single time that we come to these villages is, how can we impact them in a positive way, even more so, right? This trip around, we've have some children's books, specifically Goodnight Bitcoin, that we're providing through the Shah Marie family, and we have the Play Shah Marie game and the Goodnight Bitcoin book. The other day, I'm not sure if you all follow our Twitter at Built with BTC. We had circle time, and we were reading Goodnight Bitcoin to the nursery school students. And for me, it was. I mean, I'm not trying to get emotional on this conversation, but like, to be able to see the children be engaged and understand what's happening with the book, and to know that they're hearing the term Bitcoin and understanding that, oh, what is this new form of money? Like, money is so interesting and all the different colors, et cetera, et cetera. For us, we want to allow the children and the family members to continuously have a better positive understanding of Bitcoin, okay? They hear things all the time. The money is going up and down. It's volatile. Oh, this person lost this. This person gained this. We want them to get beyond the speculative aspect. That's only just one use case of Bitcoin, right? We want them to understand that this can be used on a daily, on the daily with them, right? It can be a part of their daily use. And you can't have that without being able to communicate with them, right? Peer to peer. Can I do this on the phone? Can I do this on Zoom? Can I have people just go out themselves and do it? Of course we can. But it is more impactful when we're there on the ground ourselves. And that's why, specifically here in Africa, every time I try to come onto the continent and set foot here, I try to go to every single school site as much as I possibly can. Right after Rwanda, I'm headed over to Nigeria. Shout out to Niger. I can't wait to be back there. We have 2 schools in Kaduna State there that I'm extremely excited to go visit. We are currently building 2 new schools in South Africa, in East Cape Town. And I'm going to be traveling there later on towards the end of March. So I'm extremely excited to kind of share, the work that we're doing there in South Africa, a huge epicenter for adoption when it comes to Bitcoin on the continent. South Africa is definitely going to be leading that portion of the world. And so for us, we continuously just try to raise awareness of our work. Our intention is to inspire others, not to force them to contribute or to donate to us. And it's more so like if you see the work, if you're motivated, you're inspired, reach out to us at any point in time. We're always willing to be able to work together with folks. We loved, Bitcoin Magazine. It was a delight working with Eric almost on a daily basis. And beyond just Bitcoin Magazine, the Bitcoin community came together for Bitcoin Black Friday to support our work. And it wouldn't have been possible without their leadership and without their generosity. And I will say this much. We haven't talked about it yet on this conversation, but Bitcoin 2022 is coming up in April. I really cannot wait to see you all in person. We have a booth there, and we're going to be speaking as well too. We're absolutely open to folks being able to come up to us and ask us any questions that they may have, and for us to be able to continue to work together as a Bitcoin community.
For those of you who've been listening and are inspired, please feel free to reach out to Youssef and the Build with Bitcoin team. I know that they can always use resources in whatever you can offer, so please do not hesitate to hit them up. And also shout out our boy, Eric.
Youssef, one more question for you, because I was just looking on the website, builtwithbitcoin.com. Any expectations or plans to implement Lightning in the near future here?
Oh my goodness, you are speaking my mind, Eric. Yes, absolutely. So right now, we're able to receive donations through tips on our Twitter at builtwithbtc. For us, that has been extremely beneficial, and we're extremely happy that we have that on there. But we partnered up with the Giving Block, which is an amazing initiative that allows other organizations to be able to accept Bitcoin and other types of cryptocurrencies as contributions and donations. But obviously for us, we were built on the blockchain, so to speak, right? We're not just some organization that now is accepting Bitcoin or now is accepting crypto. For us, having Lightning be implemented directly as a contribution is not only beneficial, it's the way that we want to be able to move forward, right? It's extremely efficient. It's very cost effective, as you can imagine. And even for us to be able to send funds out, as I hope the capacity can grow at some point in time. But nonetheless, it's a match made in heaven for us. And we actually use the Lightning education when it comes to Bitcoin education. We want folks to understand that those microtransactions are a possibility, right? Many folks, for example, we were in Kenya the other day, and someone asked us about making a donation, but they didn't want to have to incur many of the fees and how long it took. We said, hey, it's barely, not even 1% where you can send us any type of contribution when it comes to the Lightning Network, right? So that completely changes the dynamic for a foundation or organization like ours. The Lightning Network is the absolute future when it comes to, if someone wants to make a residual contribution, maybe on a daily basis, someone wants to send 2,500 sats to us on a daily basis as a recurring contribution, that can be possible within time, right? If someone wants to send monthly contributions using Lightning and not having to incur a multitude of fees or network fees or whatever it may be, that is an option as well too. So Lightning only creates solutions for those issues and problems, right? So we are absolutely working towards integrating that to make a much more seamless UX directly on the site. But right now, if you have a Lightning wallet, you can contribute to our foundation via Twitter on tips, for sure. Via Twips on Twitter, excuse me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love to hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know Jack Mahler's is watching this back in his closet at home, so he's definitely pleased to hear that you guys are utilizing those Twitter tips as well.
Thank you, Jack. We appreciate you, man. Let's do some work together. How about that?
You heard it, Jack. I know you're out there listening. Youssef, I do want to kind of touch a little bit on the call to action that you had earlier, just talking about the way Bitcoin helps anyone in any of these sort of communities. I know you spend a lot of time making sure the work you guys have done lives up to the expectations and standards you have. Where are you guys looking at trying to help build up next? What is the next community you guys are targeting that you're raising money for?
Right. And we get this question all the time. For us, it is more so any country around the world that is willing and ready to be able to learn more about Bitcoin is where we can work in, right? For us, our main focus is universal. So there is no specific region that we're only focusing on. We've done work in Latin America now. We've done work in Africa, of course. We want to be able to continue and be able to do work in Asia, as we've done work in India. India is a huge place that we want to be able to look into and integrate our education and our infrastructure model. So for us, it's more so understanding where folks want to be able to work in, reach out to us. We have a multitude of potential areas that we can work in, but for us to be able to accomplish those goals, it's going to take the Bitcoin community to come together. My dream is at Bitcoin 2022 for us to come together and support a project where we can build a school somewhere directly from the efforts and directly from the guests and patrons of the conference itself. Like, how epic would that be? And for us, we can be very creative with this. My whole intention, our whole intention as a foundation, is to be as inclusive as we possibly can, to bring as many people together as we can to be a part of this, so that like nonprofits truly get a bad rap, right? And rightfully so in certain circumstances. But we can make philanthropy better. We can improve philanthropy. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with our foundation, right? So that folks truly know where these funds are going. And with the Bitcoin community, we can truly get there, right? And so I know that may not answer your question fully, and it's not as specific as you'd like, but it's the honest truth. Like, we're ready at any time to go anywhere around the world. I'm willing to get on an airplane to go anywhere. I've gone to places and seen people, and I see the true power of Bitcoin. And there's nothing that has ever been designed when it comes to philanthropic work as efficient, as effective as Bitcoin is. And that's why I believe, and I'm so passionate about it.
I mean, Yusef, I swear to God, I have to not talk to you too often, because every time I leave conversations with you, I have a message drafted to my boss saying I'm quitting to go work with Built with Bitcoin. So, but I do want to touch on something that you kind of bring up, that, like, yes, nonprofits do get a bad rep. There's a lot of conversations that goes on around, like, for every dollar you spend, 70 cents of it goes to the organization, whatever. Like, there are all those, whatever we want to call it, bullshit, the statistics, whatever behind it. But at least with Bitcoin and donations and nonprofits rooted in a Bitcoin standard, you can publicly see how much money is being received and how much is going out and when it's going out, and if it's being spent on the things that they're publicizing. I think that is a very beautiful way of incorporating this and helping to legitimize not only the business, but the work you guys do. So I'd love to maybe ask you to share, back in the day when you were first learning about Bitcoin, about maybe some of those hurdles, because back then Bitcoin wasn't necessarily as kosher, if I may say, as a public practice, and it genuinely was being used for some sketchier deals. Talk to us a little bit about, like, some of the people you were working with that maybe were turned off by it, the experience you had. I believe I remember a story where one of the local communities actually was a little sketched out, if I'm remembering that story correctly. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, it is still difficult to be able to work with Bitcoin. The IRS is not friendly to the work that we do. And to have a nonprofit, that has the term Bitcoin in it, you can imagine how difficult it has been to amass the legitimacy within the 501c3 nonprofit world, right? But we just continue to come at them with our track record. We continue to come at them with our progress in our results. We're not trying to be, how do you say it, aggressive in our approach to, like, as disruptive as we want to be, which is fine. We're disruptors in this industry, but we want to showcase, like, the positive effects, the optimistic effects of utilizing Bitcoin, and say, you know what, fiat is used for nefarious activity as well too. Like, let's not forget this, y'all, right? And like, so we're showcasing this use case, to my opinion, its best use case when it comes to philanthropy. The transparency that you're talking about, Q, right? It's not just about the technical transparency, but we're talking about Bitcoin forces us as a foundation to be honest about our work, right? Because we know that that's there. We know that that's public, right? It's one thing to know where the money is going. Okay, that's great. That's fine. But it's another thing to know that the proof of work, like the work that's actually being done, right? And that's the real asset that Bitcoin provides for philanthropy, right? The transparency, the accessibility, right? Where you can send funds at any point in time, any time of day, any time of year. Doesn't matter if it's a holiday, doesn't matter the day of the week, right? And in more so, it's understanding that this technology, that Bitcoin itself, can make a nonprofit like ours more efficient because it saves on costs, and most importantly, it saves on time. It takes less than an hour to be able to send $100,000 to be able to build one entire school, when in a traditional sense, that would take multiple transfers, and it would take weeks, if not months, and so much back-end compliance and paperwork to kind of justify and defend that paper trail of where those funds are actually going, right? Of course, we need a paper trail with what we're doing with Bitcoin. I'm not trying to say that we don't. There's a lot of compliance we have to deal with and regulations, of course, but that Bitcoin just catalyzes the efficiency. So you have transparency, access, and efficiency. Those are three key positive notes to using Bitcoin in the philanthropic world. And that's what has allowed us, allowed our foundation to be where it is today.
Cool. Sounds good. I really don't have much more to add as we're coming up on the hour here. Q, do you have anything else? Any other questions you want to ask?
Yusuf, I guess I'd love to maybe have or give you the opportunity to just share with everyone where they can find you, follow the work that Built with Bitcoin is doing, so they can keep up as well with the updates that you guys are sharing and posting about.
I appreciate it, man. This has nothing to do with me. I would love for folks to go on Twitter and follow our foundation at Built with BTC, on Instagram at Built with Bitcoin. You can follow our work on there. We love to to engage with our supporters, individuals that have questions. You can always reach out to us via email. Builtwithbitcoin.org is our website. For us, we don't want anyone to trust anything. We want y'all to verify as much as you possibly can. And by doing so, seeing with your own eyes the work that's being done on the ground. There are a lot of communities that we're working with that are extremely special, that have unbelievable people in them. And our intention as a foundation is to allow the messaging and to be messengers of their stories, and to see what their Bitcoin journey is all about. And the storytelling is what really drives our work. And we want to continue to push that forward. But again, we can't do that by ourselves. It's going to take all of us in this beautiful Bitcoin community to be able to accomplish that. And lastly, for those of you that have not planned yet to go to Bitcoin 2022, I hope to see you all there. Please go to that conference. I learned so much last year, and I'm not trying to plug anyone at all. Like, genuinely, like, I have so much more to learn about Bitcoin and its technology and the community itself, but I loved being around Bitcoiners. It was such a cool, positive vibe. So if you haven't got your ticket yet, go to Miami, say hello, come visit us. And I hope we can all work together and, create a better quality of life for people around the world, one Bitcoin at a time, baby.
You heard it, guys. Use code YTMAG, get 10% off. If you buy with Bitcoin, you'll get 33% off. You won't want to miss it. Like, honestly, that is the most Bitcoiner statement ever, though. There's so much more you can learn. None of us on this screen right now, none of our colleagues, no one truly believes they know everything there is to know about Bitcoin. If you do, I'm sorry, but you're just frankly wrong. It's going to be a great opportunity. You're going to get a chance to actually meet us in person. I will be the very large-haired guy smoking nonstop joints, so feel free to find me out there. Okay, fine. Yes, Chris. If you are actually Satoshi Nakamoto, you know more about Bitcoin than anyone else. However, I will challenge that and say the economic impacts it has had and it's currently having, Satoshi does not know better than on the ground economists. So I look forward to debating Chris on air about some of this stuff, because he'll be joining me after the break, as well as a new episode of the Breakup with Nolan. So stick around, guys. And again, use code YTMAG to get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 tickets. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back. Thank you all for sticking around through that commercial break. And we are joined by fan favorite, my favorite segment. I have my notebook ready. I hope you do as well. Nolan, thank you for joining us for the newest episode of The Breakup. How's Barbados treating you?
Hugh, we got to work on your OPSEC, man. They're going to come get me soon. I was a terrorist last week. I was a terrorist. Come on.
Welcome to the club.
Let
I've
it
been a
go.
terrorist. I've been a terrorist since 2001. So welcome to the club, my
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, exactly. We talked about it, and that's an important distinction, right? We've all got to be terrorists now. We've all got to wake up to the fresh smell of terrorism in the air.
All you white people complaining about being called a terrorist now, it's just welcome to the club. Feel free to message me, ask me how to deal with it. I'll tell you what to say to TSA at the airports. I got it all.
I need it all. I need it all because I said it would never happen to be a terrorist. They'd know the difference between me and a terrorist. Come on, come on. Here we are, guys. Here we are, and that's what Satoshi warned us about, right? Maybe we're going to talk about Satoshi today, and we're going to talk about myth making, right? We're going to talk about myth making because the one takeaway that I got from the weekend on Twitter, right? And of course, we all spent time on Twitter this weekend, right? What's going on? We're going to figure out Russia and Ukraine, and someone's going to tweet, and we're going to know all the answers. And it turns out that didn't work out at all, right? We've all been trying to understand what's going on there. We've looked at a million threads. Everyone's an expert. What we did see is guys like Glenn Greenwald and Mike Cernovich point out to us that the kind of unanimity, the kind of activity around all of these Ukraine discussions can't be trusted. There was something about it that was leading people astray. Now, I don't have proof one way or the other, but I know that today we're not going to be talking just about the war part. The war part, we're going to leave out. Advancing on this city, these weapons and those weapons, we don't know anything about it. Who's right, who's wrong? We have our ideas for sure. We've talked about them in other episodes, but today what we're going to talk about is just that myth-making piece, because we saw a lot of myth-making going on the weekend. We saw Zelensky, the president, stick around, or did he? We're not even going to determine whether that's right or not. What we do want to talk about first is the story from last Friday, Snake Island. If you remember Snake Island, everyone was talking about it. And there was a recording, and the Ukrainian soldiers on Snake Island were staring down a Russian boat in the water, and they said with their dying breath, "Go fuck yourself." But it turns out they're not dead. We found them. We think still fog of war. Remember, all of this stuff is fog of war, and that's why we don't really want to take the tact of trying to decipher what happened and what didn't. It looks like now that all of those soldiers that did say "go fuck yourself" and died in a blaze of glory are actually just prisoners now. A lot of these stories are going on, the myth making. And we're seeing in real time people adjusting entire worldviews. We're seeing people say, well, we're going to do it this way. We're going to rip SWIFT out of the ground, and we're going to sanction Russia, and we're going to do all of these things to the financial system, and it's going to stop the problems. Now, the trouble with myth making is that myths that last for a certain amount of time, especially a short amount of time, aren't the same as the great stories that last forever. They're not the same as the stories that were planted in the ground and took years to come to fruition. When I see news today, so we're not talking about Russia and Ukraine, but we're definitely going to talk about the SWIFT piece, because that's part of this myth making. Even Bitcoiners are looking at it today. So when we first saw what Satoshi had invented, I was living in Japan in that period, 08, 09, and then found Bitcoin a few years later from the political angle when we were looking into the Occupy Wall Street stuff and what were the answers to the bailouts and all the stuff that was going on. And because I was working for the Senate Banking Committee at the time, I had a pretty good visibility into what the central banks were doing, what the Anti-Terrorism, Anti-Money Laundering Act was doing. And that was sort of a good foundation to get into Bitcoin from that political end. When I first saw Satoshi Nakamoto's name, I believe, don't know what happened, but from then on, I sort of thought that that Japanese piece had a lot to do with predictions, the future. We all knew that the name Satoshi Nakamoto was a pseudonym at the time, weren't really sure if we're going to figure out who it was. But what I knew as someone who had lived in Japan was that Japan regularly manipulated the market, the financial market, in order to keep the yen down and to be able to export goods to America. That was just a given. If you were earning yen at the time, you knew that if something went on in oil markets, for example, and I was there for the original war in Iraq, which did send commodity prices soaring, and Japan had to actively enter the Forex market to keep the yen suppressed so that they continue to export. The argument that a lot of people had was that Satoshi took the Japanese pseudonym to have that kind of moral authority to tell America in 2008, as it was printing the money, that they looked a lot like Japan in 1990. And that printing the money right then and there meant that in a few years' time, they would no longer be able to maintain global supremacy of the US dollar, and that it would fracture, and that another political money would come around, in this case, the Chinese yuan, and would fight the US dollar for supremacy. This is the sort of end result of the Triffin dilemma, basically. The Triffin dilemma being, what we hear a lot, especially around the 2008 crisis, is that American short-term policy would get eroded from long-term policy, that all these people with US dollars wouldn't allow America to do what needed to be done to fix the dollar in 2008 and would cause all of this trouble. And so the argument at the time was, and this is, I believed I'd read an article at the time. I've since looked for it, that there was this article that explained Satoshi Nakamoto's Japanese name was to have the moral authority to tell America that what Japan did, you're about to get. You're not going to be able to use the levers of monetary policy to get out of this. And another dollar is going to take over, another money is going to take over. And therefore, you have Bitcoin, because it will mean that no political dollar can take over. Now, at the time, people were saying, what's a political dollar? There's fiat money. But now, if we take a few days, just last week in Canada, we see that we have policy money, right? But it's also police money. It's policey money, policy money and police money. And this money could turn, the whole network can turn on individuals. We saw it in Canada. And that's where the P2P electronic cash system became such a novel idea, because you didn't have this third-party intermediary. And so we all know this stuff. There's nothing new in that. For me, what's new is this psychology engine piece. And I'm going to tie it into two different veins here. And it really, the first one is, so what we saw this weekend is that the SWIFT system, so SWIFT is the, what was the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecoms. Worldwank. It should be that, the Society for Worldwank Financial Telecoms. It's not. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecoms. And the SWIFT network is basically the part of the system to clear all of these transactions. And it looked like last week there weren't going to be enough sanctions in place to really keep Russia from going at it. But it's like the collective hive mind of social media called out the hypocrites in Europe for not doing this, called out people all around the world to flex their muscles. And finally, Ursula von der Leyen, a central banker with the European Bank, said, second, we will paralyze the assets of Russia's central bank. This will freeze its transactions, and it will make it impossible for the central bank to liquidate its assets. Meester, a longtime Bitcoiner, reacted to this in Twitter and said, wow, until this moment, I never fully realized how vulnerable sovereign Forex reserves are. For better or worse, this is a landmark in the history of finance. He went on to tweet, countdown to central banks adding locally custodied Bitcoin to their balance sheets. So Meester now predicts that because of this financial schism, part of Satoshi's long-term vision is this two-pole system has been created. We've got China, and in this case, they said there's going to be a Russian wheat market and an oil market. We'll get to that, plus the ruble and yuan. Now, we have two systems that are entirely predicated, it looks like, on policies, that the policies are there to perpetuate these systems. And what the EU is saying here, what Ursula von der Leyen is saying, is that it's not going to work out, right? We're going to paralyze them. We're going to paralyze them. Now, there is a loophole, apparently. The EU banning transactions with the Russia Central Bank limits itself to transactions which will be processed if necessary to preserve the stability of the union or its members. So that means they can still use SWIFT if it's a question of stability. So they didn't go the full way for these sanctions on SWIFT, but it looks like it's serious, and Russia's got some real trouble. And so we've seen all over Twitter today, Russia is going to be sanctioned into the ground, and they're going to be super poor now, and this is millions of people who rely on the ruble that are going to starve. All of that might be true. I'm not here to say that that's not true. What I am here to say is that just today, Russia's Gazprom announced a major gas deal with China, construction of a new oil pipeline to supply 50 billion cubic meters per year of natural gas to Russia, to China. So they're creating a separate economy, right? It has nothing to do at this moment with whether the ruble does well. If we look at foreign markets right now, energy prices are skyrocketing. That's Russia's de facto currency. It's the oil, it's the energy. So while the ruble is getting attacked and the banking system is getting attacked, the actual commodity value is going up. Now, Russia continues to hold that card because they have it with wheat as well. And last week, China said they would buy all the wheat, basically, Russia could make. So with wheat and oil, they've basically created a separate financial system now, a separate economy that they think is going to help perpetuate this peace in the future. So we've got this schism now. We've got SWIFT, the US dollar, the euro, the Canadian dollars, even the Swiss have joined. The Swiss joined this, right? They're always neutral, but even they said they're going to get into the financial sanctioning. So the Swiss, right, are going to get into this. So what this ends up leaving is a huge market, because the money has now ideologically divided itself over this weekend. Literally ideologically divided itself over the weekend. Exactly what Satoshi had more or less predicted, and I'm reading his mind because of the name. Once again, I always inferred the name was to have the moral authority of a Japanese person to say to an American, your monetary policy is broken. It's exactly like ours. The levers won't work. You're going to pull them, and you're not going to get anything out of them. And it's going to give rise to this other power that's going to be able to manipulate these things on par with you. And you're just going to have to live with that. So in order to avoid all national currencies, the idea is that Bitcoin can take over. Now, what does it mean by taking over? That's really what this show today is about. And I want to point out a note from a guy named Adam Curtis. He's a documentary filmmaker for the BBC. And he was interviewed by The Economist just a few years ago. And he had invented, or he had tried to popularize a word, didn't invent it. He mentions he invented it, called hyper-normalization. Hyper-normalization. So The Economist magazine asks him, what is hyper-normalization? Adam Curtis answers, what it was like living in the last years of the Soviet Union. What this intellectual who coined the phrase said, what he said was that in the 1990s, everyone from the top to the bottom of Soviet society knew that it wasn't working. They knew that it was corrupt. They knew that the bosses were looting the system. They knew that the politicians had no alternative vision. And they knew that the bosses knew that they knew. Everyone knew that it was fake. But because no one had an alternative vision for a different kind of society, they just accepted this sense of total fakeness as normal. There is a sense of everything being slightly unreal, that you fight a war that seems to cost you nothing and has no consequences at home, that money seems to grow on trees, that goods come from China and don't seem to cost you anything, that phones make you feel liberated, but that maybe you're being manipulated, but you're not quite sure, and it's all slightly odd, and it's all slightly corrupt. So he called this term hyper-normalization. And I want to hone in on one piece of that, which is this idea of a competing vision. So the reason hyper-normalization worked in Soviet Union at the end, because they didn't really know what happens tomorrow. They didn't really know. Just like the EU bankers who were pressured into the nuclear option on SWIFT, they don't really know what tomorrow offers, right? And they can say they understand, well, this will paralyze Russia. They might be right. But what if they're not? What if it doesn't paralyze Russia at all? What if Russia just says, well, we got a big buyer here, like the Gazprom deal. We don't care about the policy dollars. We sell commodities. Fiat money, it's just a bunch of words, right? These are policing policy dollars. It's political systems. And if you don't present an alternative vision, it's very hard to do that myth-making part, right? So already we see Russia, China, definitely selling a vision of the future that is not with America. Even if that's only the point, is that it's not US dollar based. It's still a vision of the future that's different. What you see the EU trying to do is hold on to that control they had and perpetuate more or less the same circumstances into the future. But of course, most people in America know the system isn't working. I think that's widely felt. And a lot of people who find their way to Bitcoin certainly feel that and certainly know that there's something else out there that they want. And when we get into that world of myth making, Bitcoiners have actually been in World War III for a long time now. It didn't start last week when Russia invaded Ukraine. The mindset has been here for a long time. And the prediction that the SWIFT network would break and there would be two separate economies in the world, a Chinese, Russia-ish one, and another one based on the internet that we recognize in America, would become a reality. And we're here now. So once again, we are completely on the timeline that Bitcoiners had already put in place. We are completely in that psychological space that Bitcoiners said we'd be in by now. And when we're thinking about psychological engines, and that's really what this show is about and what we're comparing here, we're comparing the ability for fiat currencies to perpetuate themselves into the future. Is it possible? Is the psychology intact for this thing to go in the future? Can they design a future that's worth fighting for, that people want and are interested in? I don't know. I don't know. I have my doubts. I can't see anything there that isn't a bunch of boomers looking, no offense, I have a lot of boomer friends. I try not to use boomer as derogatory as much as some people. Sometimes you can't help yourself. Are they really just promoting this stuff to a bunch of boomers, hoping that a boomer comes out of the night and saves them? So there's another like JFK guy is going to come and, you know, lead all the public institutions and inspire everyone to civic duty and join the cause and get things done. You know, in some ways, that's what Zelensky is occupying as a space in the mind right now. Here's a leader. Here's someone who is different than the leaders we've known, and he's on the front lines and shooting guns. And maybe all that is true about Zelensky. I don't know. Right now, this show isn't about Zelensky. It's about the people who can make the future and who can perpetuate the future. And when I look at that competing visions, Bitcoiners have no lack of vision for what the future looks like. It obviously doesn't include seed oils, right? We know that. It doesn't include seed oils. But let's just take a look, because the frame for Bitcoiners for World War III is not Russia fights Ukraine and then a bunch of other countries come in and then some new institutions are built and countries win, and then there's winning countries and losing countries. We've covered World War III on this show a bunch. In the view of a lot of people in Bitcoin, the view that World War III is fought on, the tensions are between states and individuals, like what we saw in Canada last week, like what we saw in Canada. So a state using the banking system to impose sanctions on individuals, the same kind of sanctions we're talking about today that have been put on Russia and other countries, right? So it's the use of these tools at the state level or the individual level. And Bitcoiners' idea of the future contrasts with that. Now, we can take one of the larger Bitcoiners in the world, Elon Musk, and give you an idea of the real fault lines of World War III as they happened this weekend. So we saw Russia is fighting Ukraine and this and that, and who's the heroes, and we don't know, and good guys. We know there's bad guys. We got the bad guys checked out, but who are the good guys? Well, how about this? Elon Musk joined the fight by bringing the Starlink satellites to Ukraine this week, right? So this is an individual acting as at the capacity of the state, intervening in a conflict and really tipping the balance. If you're adding spatial satellite communications to a battlefield that can't be suppressed by either side, you've done something we've never seen in the history of warfare ever before, I don't think. We've seen states do it. We've seen America come in and put up a mesh network. Did you know POMP? You know, everyone talks about POMP, right? And maybe they don't give him enough respect. I don't know if people know what POMP did. POMP set up the internet network, the nodes in the Iraq war for the internet to actually work. He was a soldier for the US Army that helped set up this entire network. He knows a lot about mesh networks and deploying them. And that's one frame that he used to get into Bitcoin. He understood the value of a network like that in a war zone. So states did do it before, but now we have a human who came in and did it. We heard Russia say that you're not going to get to take rides up on the Russian space program anymore to the space station. Well, Elon just tweeted them the logo of SpaceX. That just ended it. SpaceX, leave me alone. But what I think is the most important story, besides the satellites being incredible, is that Elon Musk this weekend joined the Ripple lawsuit against the SEC. It has been my belief for many years that Elon Musk was fighting a public opinion war against the SEC, that most things that he was doing in regards to Dogecoin and all this other stuff was really just a way to frame a fight that he had with a really important and obtrusive public institution. Now, it turns out the SEC is trying to increase the definition, the threshold for accredited investor as we speak. So already trying to increase the threshold to participate in American capitalism and the ability to make money in America. They're literally capping it and have capped it since the 30s at an extraordinary amount. And so at the same time, you've got Elon Musk trying this fight out. And what we see is that he's fighting against the short sellers. He's fighting against everyone who's been influencing the market against them. And this has been him building a case for years, it turns out. This isn't a new thing. He's been building this case for years, something I suspected for a long time. And if you look at the world that we live in right now with Bitcoin, so we've got this creation of a two system now, it's bifurcated. We've got the American system with oil and SWIFT and the US dollar and the euro and the Canadian dollar. We've got wheat and oil and the renminbi and the ruble on this side, but that money isn't as important as this as far as currency goes. So their fiat currencies aren't as important as their commodities. But the third option, of course, is what Elon Musk just showed you, which is the true type of money we're trying to create here, which is fuck you money. And by fuck you money, I mean being able to launch a satellite, many satellites, to influence the internet coverage during a war, or to fight against a country's bargaining trip of a space program, or even to fight against one of the most obtrusive American institutions on the ability to go out and make money. He's literally said to everyone, fuck you, this week. That's truly fuck you money. And the vision that Satoshi gave us isn't so much that we're all as rich in fiat as Elon Musk is to be able to tell countries to go fuck themselves. But it's to fulfill, in some ways, what the Snake Island mythology failed to fulfill, right? They told an army to go fuck yourself on that boat, got caught up in the old world of myth making, What's true, what isn't true, we don't know. But we know that in Bitcoin, the true goal is to create real fuck you money that can't be shut down and that can't be stopped, so that you can in fact stare at a ship at sea that threatens war on you and say, fuck you, go fuck yourself, and mean it, and not have all these systems collapse around you and fail to get you there. So for me, what I see today, to conclude all of this, is that what's most important is that you're offering a vision in the future. We started a war that most people now acknowledge looks like World War III. Who's really fighting for a competing vision of the future on the American, SWIFT, EU side? I don't know. I'm asking it as a real question. What is the vision? Is it we keep it the same as it is, except the EU doesn't have to deal with China anymore and Russia, and we can ignore the Russian oil and the Russian wheat, and it doesn't matter what it does for global prices? Maybe. Maybe it's just two separate poles and we never live together again, and it perpetuates into the future, hyper normalized like it was in the end of the Soviet Union. Or a new vision built off of fuck you money takes root even more, and people realize they can't be stopped, and all the truckers go to Bitcoin, and all the other institutions that we would need end up saying, this looks like a better future than the one being offered by the current myth makers. Because the current myth makers are telling you that people got shot, but they didn't. We're telling you people might get shot, but we've got to get to a point where we can say fuck you and it wouldn't make a difference. That's the episode of the Breakup today.
Awesome, Nolan. Well, thank you so much. I have quite a few questions that I'd love to unpack with you. And correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of these myth makers are analogous to the idea or concept of history is written by winners, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, how much of this sort of myth making, if you will, do you attribute to having won wars or having this sort of control over whatever medium you need to communicate these stories? Because from the sounds of it, and we can dive into this if you'll entertain these conversations, but from what we're hearing about what the goings on in Russia, for example, if you don't have access to internet in Russia, the state has essentially said to you what is going on in their eyes. And that is vastly different than what is being told to us. Now, I can only say in that lens because I'm not feet on the ground. How much of the myth making is happening based on the control of access of information versus winning battles or winning and retaining control of power?
Yeah, I think it's the human mind wants to see all this stuff in a 3-act play. It can't help it. We're so trained to 3-act plays that there's no way you can't avoid it. We want to see the end of the movie, and we'll fill in the blanks every single time. We'll just fill it in. And so you need nothing, do no more than show Zelensky in the street fighting, and you'll say, wow, that's a new kind of leader. And you'll start rewriting the whole script to the future in your head just by seeing him. Well, what if he wins? And what if Russia can't do this militarily? So all of that's happening, for sure. And the appetite is to get the story out immediately and say, well, this weekend it happened. But I don't know if wars and the myth making can last the kind of timeframes we're talking about here from a short-term news cycle point of view. Because when I see Russia happily moving along with the Gazprom deal, I say, well, was the attack really on Ukraine, or is the attack on the financial system? Right? What's being fought right now? I think everyone's watching Ukraine, and in the end, what could, if Russia and China tried to leave SWIFT without Ukraine happening? Think about that for a second. Think about that world. No, we're out of here. That would be seen as an affront. That would be seen as global war. But now the EU bank did it for them, right? The EU bank kicked them out. So if Russia turns around and goes back, leaves Ukraine today, they've still managed to create this bifurcated system. And it's easy to imagine, it's not numbers, right? On this show, we say that a lot. We're talking about numbers, but not math. It's psychology. So I think a central banker could say, well, Russia is, what is it, like a third of the global energy or something? It's like number 3, but I forget how much of the whole cocktail is Russia. Let's say they're number 3 in oil and gas. Let's just say it's a third. I don't remember. So they got a third of that. And if they just switch it over to, the system can fall down, right? We don't know. It's not, if the central bankers in the Federal Reserve or the European Union say, oh, we're just going to take out 30%, we can make up for it. We can still be number 1. It's not exactly that. You're just not minus 30%. You might be minus the whole thing. You can't be half pregnant. You're either the global reserve currency or you're not. There is no in between, right? It's like saying, you know when President Clinton in his era was losing power at one point. He'd lost in the midterms, both the House and the Congress, and the House and the Senate. And he was fighting with Newt Gingrich. And Newt was taking all kinds of power. He was a Speaker of the House like Pelosi is now. And he was forced to go in front of everyone and say, the president is still relevant. The president of the United States is still relevant. It's a bit like having to say you're famous, right? If you have to say you're famous, guess what? You're not, right? So if the United States now has to say it's the global reserve currency, what isn't it, right? It's not a thing you need to brag about. It's not a thing you need to brag about. And so when I see all this fighting, myth making, what's going on right now, it has to settle on something. It can't just stay out there in that hyper normalized world, because everyone's waiting for the story to end. Everyone wants to end the story. I don't think the story's end is going to happen in the streets of Ukraine or Kiev. A lot of Bitcoiners believe that it will only happen until this thing is at least suppressed or pushed down to a point where it won't affect Bitcoiners any longer. And we're not there yet. So we're still in World War III.
Just really quickly, I did look up. Russia is the second largest producer of oil for the world, behind just America. And that just goes to show you the leverage that they have and are flexing and believe themselves to have. I thought I saw a statistic also talking about like the grain production of Ukraine on the global scale. It accounts for about 40% of the total global grain production. When you start to account for these things and start to, I think, take them, what does it look like 5 steps from now? Mm-hmm. Best case and worst case scenario, you start to see a bit of a full picture. Right now, it's like we have a couple of lines drawn on a map. That's literally it. You see lines from, well, they're invading here, they're invading this way, and this is what they're doing. But we don't really have an idea of, okay, but what is this leading to? Because, like, yes, we can say Putin's an asshole. Putin's an asshole. All right. The Russian sleeper cell is now on. Yeah. Easy to say. Absolutely. Like, without a doubt, Russian sleeper cell. I look forward to having dinner with you before you kill me later this week. But regardless of that, I think there is some merit to the idea that they are thinking 3 steps ahead. So maybe we need to start mapping out what those future steps really look like.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, is that Bitcoiners have. Mm-hmm. And that if we put our hopes and attention into what's already there fighting this, I see them as creating this problem. I mean, they think they've convinced themselves that kicking Russia out of SWIFT is a punishment. It's a punishment. I don't know if it is. It might be exactly what they want. At least from what I can tell, they've been working for this for many years. We spoke on this show, one of our first episodes, about how much the Russian reliance on US dollars had fallen from 90% in 2014, 2015 to only 46%, 47% now. I brought that up a few times in the show, and that shows the demand that Russia has for the US dollar. They've gotten away from it. And that means a lot. And I know I'm not the first person to say that. But what I'm saying is the competing vision of the future, this alternative vision of the future, is worth more in Bitcoin than almost anything. and is what can actually win this war. And when you think about this psychological engine and perpetuating these things forward, that's what Bitcoiners have felt for a long time. And that if they don't have a fully baked, you said lines on a map, yes, but Bitcoiners have been designing something that would not even understand the lines on a map anymore, that they would be irrelevant no matter where you drew them. And that we would have this system that would truly separate state and money, which is what we've done the opposite of up here, right? We're creating states based totally on their money. That's it. That's the point of these things. There's no other point to the EU other than it's a state of money. It doesn't do anything else. Even the bills they create were not able to be real. So if you've ever seen the euros, the windows and the doors, right? Those aren't at all any real windows or doors. None of them. Because they couldn't agree on even decorating the bills in a way that they could all agree with, right? So they had to make up fake geometric patterns for the money because they couldn't even agree past that. So forget about a competing or unified vision for the future. There's no such thing. They figure they shut them off of SWIFT and it's punishment, but maybe that's what they wanted.
So I want to unpack a couple of things, and Chris, our producer, is going to hop on as well. And he brought up an excellent point that this punishment of SWIFT, or the kicking out of SWIFT, is more for their allies, Russia's allies, than it actually is to punish Russia themselves, potentially put more pressure on Russia by having yet another country or another one of their allies turn on them. I know myself, I was very surprised when I saw some of the headlines regarding China and how they have actually begun to push back against Russia's stance. I frankly was viewing them as sort of partners in a lot of this. I'm curious, though, as we kind of talk about the idea of the US laying claim to the dollar being the global reserve currency. I, strangely enough, had this discussion over the weekend where I said, quite frankly, and I stand by this, and I presented to the two of you, the US dollar will remain the global reserve currency for as long as China wants it to be. And until China says, no, we have a different system that we want to have in place, they will allow the US to have this quote unquote dominance, global reserve currency, whatever they deem it to be, because of the amount of debt that they have over our heads, which I believe is a little under 5% of our entire national debt is owed to China or China's businesses, et cetera, based on the last numbers I saw. So I'd love to present that sort of line of reasoning to the two of you and see if you guys agree or disagree.
I mean, I've always thought that. And whenever people said, well, if China calls in the debt, you know, America is going to be screwed. But there's a corollary to that. The debt won't be worth anything. So they call it in, but it's not worth anything, right? Because it would tumble immediately. So China would definitely have to be willing to eat a bunch, but who cares? Because the prize is
freedom
from all of it, right?
Yeah, freedom from the US dollar dominance.
Yeah,
from the petrodollar, if you will.
Yeah. So I've always believed that that's the way it could play out, and likely will. I don't think you have to see it even as calling in the debt. I think what you'd have to see is US dollar not performing as the top collateral in the world, because that's all that matters. So trade finance that goes on between China and America is for unbelievable. I can't even, trillions. I don't know the number of I think it was 4 trillion a year at some point. It's absurd, right? So it's not just the trade, it's the financing of all the trade between individual suppliers along the supply chain. So some even if there's $1 billion coming in a cargo ship from China to America, there might be 10 billion financed, because it goes from place to place on a supply chain and everyone is getting financing, because they might not sell the iPhone or whatever it is down the river until months later, right? So because of that, they have to keep what they call factoring or invoice financing. And when you finance these invoices, it's literally an invoice. You get a loan off of it, you can borrow off of it. if it ever happens where any of these invoices aren't, where they say, well, in 90 days when you pay up, you're doing what was that again with dollars? Well, I don't think it's gonna be worth what it is now, and then therefore it's gonna cost you way more because I don't want to deal with the risk of your American dollar. And it's exactly that. So that could happen real quick, real quick.
Yeah, China, how's it going, Nolan? Oh, am I still
That's
muted?
life, man. No, you're good.
Yeah, no. So I guess the one thing that's very interesting too for China, China's in a weird spot because one, they rely so much on the US global reserve currency status of the United States. But they thought their end around it was kind of doing the Belt and Road Initiative by like getting the dollars instead of buying treasury bonds with the money that we sent them for the goods and services, they and stocks and equity and building up, buying up assets. And then politicians kind of saw that and said, oh, well, we don't want foreign, people owning houses, businesses, and all these different things. So not only did they push back, China said it's not worth anything. So then they started pushing dollars into other countries such as Vietnam, a lot of places in Africa, Taiwan. And like basically what they're doing is they're trying to entrap those countries in kind of like what we do with the rest of the world as well. They're just, they're getting this money, they're pushing it outside, and they're preventing inflation of the Chinese yuan. Because if the dollars were to stay there, the yuan would get pushed down in value, and their people would, they basically pulled their people out of poverty by like, we put poverty onto China, China's now put poverty onto the world, and the US and China have grown both because of that. The US kind of losing its hegemony, China growing, but it comes full circle eventually, one way or the other. And then, these other countries, even though China and the US are much stronger than these smaller nations that they're giving loans to, it's kind of the equivalent of like Russia invading Ukraine. I know that they have more ties and they're more closely related in terms of family and friends. But, if a foreign power or country were coming into your country and said, oh, you didn't pay us back, now we own you, you get into like kings and castles and knights, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, I never understood this, even this whole analysis that we hear about Ukraine and Russia, oh, they both speak Russian. Well, England speaks English. America didn't have any trouble fighting them. That was never an issue. So what if they spoke English? It didn't matter. It was a big problem. They did other crazy stuff, so they had to go. Yeah. Look, it is a battle of hearts and minds now. It is absolutely about psychology, and it is about which system will perpetuate the future that we want. And when you see the kinds of imbalances that either this Russian Chinese hybrid system will offer, who knows if anyone wants to be a part of that? That's some form of federated oligopoly behavior. And I mean, that's what they have in common is this, and we're seeing it more and more in America. To say that what's going on here is not a federated oligopoly and not just a bunch of nation states. It isn't nation states anymore. It got perverted and twisted. If it was just nation states, we would have a lot more transparency. And I think that's, to get back to what Elon Musk did, what all Elon Musk is asking for with this SEC case is more transparency for the market. And it looks like the SEC already reacted. They're putting more controls in for short selling. And more controls for short selling means less market manipulation. He believes he's getting manipulated all the time. And that's why he manipulates the market himself the way he does. It's been my belief that the minute we enter this system here for Bitcoin, we are getting manipulated. I've said it on the show a few times. We're absolutely getting manipulated. I said it on one of the first shows, I believe was about this. It was about the first bit of Russia. And they were saying it was when Bukele was going to Turkey to meet with the Drojan. And then the rumors were Russia was going to ban Bitcoin, if you remember. They're going to ban it. And then the next week they had this framework to make it legal. So I said right away that no one's banning it. When I saw that, it's not banning it in Russia. I said they're accumulating. They're running the market. They're putting a bad rumor in, and they're going to buy. I have no proof about any of that, and I'm not telling anyone that that's financial advice or that happened. I don't know. But if I was Russia and this was all going on, and I only even knew a little bit about Bitcoin, I would treat it like any other asset in the world, and I'd manipulate it the way I'd been used to manipulating things. They manipulate gas, they manipulate all of these commodities. Why not? Right? That's the point of participating for some of these big parties. So when I see Elon Musk going on that channel to get more information up the road, right? Once again, I still see privacy as something that you can buy as a service on the side. I don't know if we get to make it sort of the base layer of what we're building here. The base layer is the commodity of Bitcoin. What we do at the block space is another story, but the commodity itself means that we fight directly with central banks. That's the enemy here. And the fiat culture of printing the money that has all of these knock-on effects that only we've started to understand. They seemed normal for a long time, but it was part of that hyper normalization, it looks like. But we just got used to it. And what does anything cost? And who knows? And so when I see Elon Musk with the go fuck you money going towards these people to get more information from them in a way that could help everybody, that's what we're trying to build here. And I think World War III ends in Russia and Ukraine when people can talk about all the money that's going on there, not just T-bills and debt and how much gas do you have. I mean, all of it. Who was there? Who are the people on either side of this fight financially? We have no idea. We can't see it. No one shares that information, and it doesn't exist. So we can guess, we can speculate. It looks like we have some ideas, but we don't really know. I'm not going to come on the show and tell you because I don't know, right? I see stuff. I don't know if it's true.
Yeah, and I'm going to tie it back with one more thing, Nolan, from your previous point about Newt Gingrich coming out and saying, talking about like when Clinton was losing power, but basically saying like the president doesn't matter. There was a great episode on Joe Rogan's podcast, ironically, even before the whole fiasco of all this went on, with Patrick Bet-David. For those that don't know him, he runs Valuetainment. It's a YouTube channel. It's a great channel. I believe, Q will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he escaped Iran to come to the States. And
Iran.
basically, Iran.
Iran. I will
Iran.
correct you.
Iran to escape and come to the States, and lived a very entrepreneurial life and kind of built up a life that was not easy, but, you know, escape Iran to come to the States. So he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had a great question for Joe, which ties back exactly to, he was talking about power. And Patrick gave a layout of 5 different differentiators. I'm going to butcher this now, but he said, who's the most powerful group, person, or organization in the world? And he's like, President of the United States, a billionaire such as Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, a tech company such as Facebook, you know, Google, Amazon, something like that. And then I forget the last 2, but he didn't bring up the World Economic Forum. He didn't bring up the Rothschilds, or like kind of like a shadow agency. He didn't bring up the Saudis that run the oil in Saudi Arabia. But it was just a very interesting question. And they kind of debated back and forth. They ultimately didn't come up with an answer. But I think tying back to your point, like, oh, his power is kind of negligent here. I think everyone sees that they're globally, especially the World Economic Forum. I do have to commend them for this. They keep talking about Build Back Better, this great reset. Like, everyone's fighting for power right now, and they want to be the one at the top. Like the World Economic Forum wants it. The US hegemony of politicians wants it. You know, Google wants it. Facebook wants it. It's funny, Facebook's going through a bunch of litigations against Europe right now, of Europe saying, oh, if you don't do these different things, like we're gonna, like, you have to like tell people about their privacy. And Facebook's basically calling their bluff and saying, fine, then kick us out of Europe, we don't care. And like Facebook's like, okay, they will lose a lot of money if all of Europe gets shut off from Facebook. But Facebook's like, they believe that the people like Facebook more than they like the politicians in Europe. And it's an interesting dynamic, because if you think Europe, I would assume, is very similar to the United States, that people are very sick of the old guard and the old politicians, while also being frustrated with corporations such as Facebook for various reasons of censorship and other things like that. So yeah, I'll just leave it on that.
A similar thing happened. You know, I'm from Quebec, and I don't want to take I don't mean this as a victim, but I grew up as a minority. I'm not trying to take any minority qualifications here or anything like that, right? I grew up as a minority because I was English in a predominantly French area. So, you know, nothing about oppression or anything like that. But there are a lot of laws that Americans would find crazy if they knew they existed on their own continent. Some of them are, for example, French people can't go to English school. I could go to any school I wanted, but the French aren't allowed to go to English schools. It's completely banned. And another crazy one is language laws. You're not allowed to write, and this would happen. I worked in a lot of restaurants as a teenager. And if your English like whiteboard, right? If my English in chalk specials of the day weren't the right size compared to the French, we would get a fine. They could fine you, right? The language police. And one of the most amazing stories, just like we were talking about Facebook, McDonald's was told they had to get the possessive apostrophe off the S because it's English grammar. So they said, you got to change all your signs. This is not going to work. And McDonald's is like, okay, well, peace. We're going to leave. And of course they had to buckle because everybody loves McDonald's. So that was the end. So they had to buckle. So now it's one of the only English signs you can get in Quebec. It's McDonald's with the possessive S, totally English. And I said to them, it's a Scottish restaurant anyway. It's not English. So what are you talking about?
That's wild. Q, if there's anything else you want to add here.
No, I'm obsessed with David Patrick Bet. Yeah.
Patrick Bet David.
Yeah, fuck. I always do that. I got to get that locked down before he ever responds to my cold emails to invite him on. If you're watching, please come on to our show. Let's take a quick commercial break and then we will dive head first into Ukraine. Although, wait, I want to share two things really quickly. First, I love Nolan, to get your thoughts on what I'm sharing right now on the screen is an image from the New York Times where Vladimir Zelensky is essentially begging, asking, and has now signed an application to admit Ukraine into the EU. Would love your thoughts on just what that could have as far
personally,
as
personally, I would do anything I can to get Zelensky to speak more about what's going on. I have a feeling he knows way more than is shared globally right now. And by that, I would like him to be as comfortable as possible in order to get that information out of him. So I don't think it really matters to appease Russia right now. I think this is all baked in, and whatever you would do right now, I don't think could make them any angrier, or they're already assuming NATO is on their border. And I guess here's the best way to describe Russia and Ukraine that I've heard. It's called the cock and balls theory. The cock and balls. Have you heard the cock and balls theory? That if you draw a map of Russia and you look at Georgia, where they just had an intervention, it's kind of like the balls. And if you draw Ukraine, right, then all the little guys up here didn't really matter. Those are kind of like the, that was okay for NATO to come. But if you're gonna, this is a Scott Adams analogy, and I thought it worked. They already assume they're going after the cock and balls here, that NATO is coming to kick them in the nuts. And if that's true, you can't really threaten them more anyway. So I'd say you can't lose by allowing Zelensky in. It's not like it would make a difference. It's not like if we said, oh, Putin, we're not going to let him in the EU. So you're going to stop or we chill. I don't think that's going to happen. So let him in, make him comfortable, but get him talking. Get him talking. I want to know more about Zelensky and what he's got to say. Because I'm sure inside of there, don't forget there's an impeachment in America based on him, right? Let's not forget about the 2019 impeachment, which he was all up and through and all around. And so there's a lot going on there. Let's find out. Let's find out what about it all. I want to know. Sunlight. Let the light shine in.
I think to your point, I mean, look, over the course of the last week and a half, Zelensky has really turned into this internet figure. The memes are starting to come in, and whether or not they're in good taste or whether you think this is the right approach. I mean, I saw a lot of backlash from the Ukrainian Twitter page posting a political cartoon of Hitler sort of passing a baton on, touching lovingly, endearingly Putin's young face. And there was backlash on that, saying, why present this meme in such a trying time when in reality, like, this has been done for generations and millennia. I think to your point, we will start to see Zelensky put into the spotlight. I saw tweets from him over the weekend saying that he very well may not live through this. He's concerned for the safety of him and his family. my concern genuinely is before we're able to learn more, both about what he is doing now and what he has done in the past, he will not be able to be the one to share those stories. And if so, that will be a shame. But let's hop on for a quick commercial break, and we'll dive much deeper into all things Ukraine. Stick around, and we'll be back shortly.
Thanks, Nolan. We'll catch you later.
Yeah, guys, take it easy. See you tomorrow.
Now.
Welcome back, everyone. It is me, your host, your fearless leader, the haired wonder, Q, and I'm joined by our producer, Chris, who is just putting together some quick things that we want to be sharing with you. But at this point going forward, I think the rest of the show will be dedicated to the ongoing events in Ukraine. I do want to preface this by saying neither Chris nor myself are historians. We are not war experts. We are not experts in Eastern European history. I do not present myself as some sort of Russian or Ukrainian expert or even war expert. We are simply going to be interpreting some of the news and facts that have been presented to us on social media by different media outlets. We are not necessarily agreeing with these views. We are not believing or supporting anything. We are simply trying to share what available information is out there and help you all understand what information is being made available to other people. We will share stories from one of our colleagues' family who essentially lives over in Russia and what they have experienced. I'd also love to take a moment, and I did not ask his permission to do this. Max, I know you listen, our audio engineer behind the scenes really shed some light and helped me go down a rabbit hole over the weekend. And I think his message, it is very long, but I will do my best to read it because I think it sheds a lot of light on a lot of things going on.
Yeah, thanks, Q, for the introduction. I will agree with Q's sentiment. I'm not an expert in Eastern European politics or geopolitical games or even anything that's happened over the last 20, 25, 30 years, whatever it is. This is just kind of a lot of the information that we've been taking in across various platforms, whether it's from mainstream media, whether Twitter or various sources. So Q, if you want to share with Max's stuff first, and then we'll go into it.
I'm just going to read this off. It is long, so bear with me, everyone. Okay, events are moving very quickly in Eastern Ukraine. On February 21st, 2022, Putin made the decision to recognize the two separatist republics in Donbass. He then immediately responded to their request for military assistance with buses of troops and equipment that began moving that same day. What's important to understand is that while the mainstream media called this an invasion, the reality of the matter is that Putin is moving troops into friendly territory. These territories have been independent since the US-backed overthrow of Yanukovych, I apologize for my mispronunciation, in 2014. Those who didn't follow the 2014 conflict closely might not be aware that Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are primarily ethnic Russian, rejected Washington's puppet government and voted overwhelmingly in a referendum to rejoin Russia. Putin refused this request at the time because he knew that if he moved in at that moment, it would have escalated in ways that did not serve Russia's interests. But the fact that these republics have held together for over 7 years makes for a very different equation in 2022. International law establishes the right of self-determination. This is the entire premise of the Declaration of Independence, and any sovereign nation has the right to request military assistance from an ally to protect themselves from an aggressor. The sequence of events will lead to some interesting debates and votes in the UN, but even if this does nothing to de-escalate the situation militarily, it will expose a diplomatic rift that will divide the world in ways that will surprise people who have not followed geopolitical developments over the past 10 years. Alliances have shifted. When war becomes official, many countries will hitch their fate with the Eastern Axis. He goes into the China discussion, which I don't want to actually share because I think information has changed on that front since he shared this sort of post with us. I think that those two paragraphs in particular are the main meat of what I really wanted to discuss there. And I think to unpack that is very important. Beyond the China stats, which we shared briefly about how they bulked, I have, for the last 2 weeks now, more than that probably, been discussing the Iran sort of factor in all of this. And I very selfishly do want to start the conversation over there, Chris, where I had mentioned in the past that both Putin and Xi Jinping have been meeting with the Iranian president. What they're discussing is behind closed doors. However, my assumption has been two countries that have had threats of sanctions held over them for certain actions or behaviors or political stances, whether it's invading Ukraine, potentially invading Taiwan, etc. They are meeting with a country that has lived under sanctions for US sanctions for over 50 years. They are, in my mind, no doubt discussing how to live under sanctions. What was that like? What were the strains economically that your country faced? What are some of the benefits of doing it? And how did you get by? Because this is the longest any sort of US sanctions have been held over a country now. At this point, I believe, someone in the chat, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on my date calculations there. Last week, the Iranian president actually visited Qatar. During these meetings, it is understood that the Qatari president had conversations with the Iranian president regarding exporting their oil and natural gas reserves through Qatar and Turkey to the rest of Eastern Europe. Now, some of you who may not have been following, the US, since Biden had come into office, had been meeting with Iran to discuss re-signing a nuclear deal. These talks have progressed to a point where over the last week and a half, news had started coming out saying that an agreement for a new Iranian nuclear deal is imminent. Now, I want to share my screen because when you go and Google this, it's very important that you understand what you're actually reading and seeing. The first couple of links are Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post. You have a Reuters post and an Al Jazeera post as well. The key one here is the CNN one from 2 weeks ago. So this tells me that a deal between Iran and the US from 2 weeks ago is said to be days away based on a French minister's comment. Now, as an Iranian, I still remember the day the Iran nuclear deal was signed. And I remember in particular, CNN cutting to Netanyahu to speak on the announcement. And his first few words were not kind words to Iran or Obama for this deal being made. And I will never forget the screen cutting to black. And you saw on CNN Live that jagged color scheme where you essentially know and see, hey, something cut, technical issues, whatever. And CNN anchors come back on to say, oh, sorry, we're having technical issues. I don't believe that. I saw in that moment the Israeli president condemn actions to bring peace to a region. This tells me that I'm not necessarily going to trust any of these news sources coming out of Israel regarding this topic. And I urge you to not either. Expand and look at other places. But the key here right now to take away from all of this, it sounds in my mind and my takeaway, Chris, I will present this to you after my very long ramblings here. Iran essentially is sitting on the nuclear deal. They have the deal in place. My understanding is all the points are going to be almost identical to the original deal signed with Obama. However, Iran has a choice. They can align with the West and exit their sanction period and enter potentially a new era for the country, or they can align with the East and Russia and China, and things can get messy and hairy in Asia, in Europe, and in the rest of the world very, very quickly. I think China's decision and conversation last week may tip the scales in the favor of the West, but I'd love your thoughts, Chris, on what I've shared and sort of how this can impact the world and this conflict right now in Ukraine in particular.
I mean, if I was I'm going to say it wrong, Iranian president. Iranian president. If I was the Iranian president, I would definitely, you hate to say the deal's almost across the line, but everything that's happened in the last week, I would kind of wait and see. Yeah, the West is the global superpower. And as Nolan was saying in our previous segment, the world reserve currency. But, you know, if things shake up that it goes the other way, I mean, let's be honest, something that I learned very recently, I didn't realize Russia actually has more nukes than the US. The US is a very close second, but in terms of sheer number and volume, the Russians have more nuclear warheads than the United States. That doesn't mean that, you know, the US couldn't pump out more or develop more, or maybe they have some hidden that aren't like on the ledger or record. But based on public records of how much the US has and how much the Russia has, the Russians have more, I think like 600 more nuclear warheads. They have just over 6,000. The United States has like 5,500. So I'm not saying that, oh, like I don't want to be a nuclear power if I was the Iranian president, but it's definitely something to be like, if I ally with the US and then the US hegemony topples, it's not going to happen overnight, but then you're aggravating Russia and you could be seen as another target by them. So it's definitely, you know, very turbulent waters. And I don't know if that's a good analogy, Q. Let me know if that analysis is smart or what you think.
No, I completely agree. And there is definitely the factor of, hey, we may not necessarily agree with what Russia is doing, but Russia is a lot closer to us as far as geographic location than the US, and they can inflict a lot more damage quicker than the US can. I don't hate the idea of sitting on your hands. To be honest, this is, look, I've seen this country personally. I've visited, I have had conversations with my family that still lives there. I see and hear news that comes directly from sources there. And that country has unfortunately fallen apart under its leadership. However, in a weird way, for the first time in decades, in generations, Iran has this crazy leverage where, because they have been unable to sell their oil and natural gas reserves to the rest of the world, they have such a large supply. And we are dealing with an oil and gas crisis in Eastern Europe, just based solely on the blockade of and control of the Russian pipelines by Russia, and then the sanctions down to stop building and construction of the second pipeline. On top of that, we have this gas crisis in the US, where last I saw in Los Angeles when I left, gas prices were over $5 a gallon. Cheapest gas over $5 a gallon where you're looking. Like, this is not, it's only going to get worse. And at a certain point, I hate saying it like this. I genuinely do. This is not, I do not want this to happen. But again, no, purely thinking of this through a logical sense, the longer Iran holds off on signing this, the more leverage they have. The higher they can charge for their gas and oil, the more money they can bring in, the more they can do. Now, that's if you have a very logical and cunning leadership in place, which I just don't think, and I'll call them all out right now. I don't think you actually know what you're doing. As I said in my very first ever article for Bitcoin Magazine, where I wrote a letter to the new Iranian president explaining why they actually need to reverse their short-term Bitcoin ban and adopt a Bitcoin standard. It'll be very interesting. I think in a weird way, we're watching the global power shift from west to east, in my opinion. And I don't think that the US is going to be sort of the focal point that it's been for generations since the World War II.
Yeah, and even if you think about it, Russia, I mean, Putin's not stupid. I will definitely give him that. I don't think he's a nice dude. I don't think he's a fair leader. I can definitely say all those things, but he's definitely not dumb. He definitely saw, as Trump was leaving office, there was plans to build a pipeline from Canada into the United States. It definitely would make Canada and the United States less reliant on foreign oil from, you know, Saudi Arabia, from Russia, from all of this. And then right as we were entering the pandemic, the US bought, I think, 1 million barrels of oil from Russia. There's even talks, even after all this Ukraine stuff, from who is Biden's press secretary, Psaki. She was saying they're not planning on stopping buying oil from Russia, which is pretty funny that you cut them off of the SWIFT system. And then how would you still keep buying oil from Russia now that they're excommunicated from the SWIFT system? I mean, the United States isn't on a Bitcoin standard. So that means they're going to be shipping gold bullion bars in exchange for oil barrels coming the other way. Would Russia attack those ships? Would we attack those ships of Russian oil? It's just a very weird, peculiar place to be in, for sure. now I guess going back to us, like I know the pipeline was in place for Trump and for a lot of the U.S. oil gas companies. I know Alex has a very different take too, because he lives in Iowa and there's companies that want to put pipelines right through his family's farmland. So I kind of feel for Alex as well, that like kind of there's people against the pipelines for sure. And I know it seemed like always there was a more conservative side, build the pipeline, it's good for it. And then there's the liberal side of it's bad for the environment, we shouldn't do that. And you know, it seemed to be one of those things that Trump was doing it, whether it was good or bad, I won't talk on, but he was going to do it. And then Biden got in office and said, no, now we're canceling the pipeline. But then that has repercussions of we are still reliant on other countries for oil. And you know, now on the brink of I hate to say World War III, that's thrown around way too much, but like everything that's going on in Russia and Ukraine, there's definitely has consequences. And I think when Putin saw that Biden was pulling out of that deal, that works once again in Putin and Russia's favor. Anything you want to add there, Q?
I definitely think that at this point, it's about leverage. I think it's comical that we give them a slap on the wrist that doesn't come back to really bite us. We are very, and I think over calculating. Hey, we still need Russian oil, so we can't stop that. We're not going to put them on the SWIFT system. And you're absolutely right. How do we compensate them? Are you writing a giant check? Is what those oversized checks you see on the game show? Is that what you're going to drop off to Putin? Obviously, I'm kidding.
Are we going to wire money to like Turkey, who's very corrupt, and then they're going to bring cash in bags to Russia to pay for it, and then they ship the oil to like literally like the logistics of it's hilarious.
I mean, look, it's not out of the realm of possibility, nor is it not something that I'm saying not too many times, but essentially what I'm trying to say is like, we've done this kind of shit before. I don't have any tinfoil. Otherwise, I tinfoil hat it up right now. But
I'm gonna tinfoil hat it up. I'm gonna cut you off right now. Q, you and I want to go war dog style this. We bring like $1 billion worth of cash in bags over there, give it to the Russians, and then make our way back with the oil. We get a cut of it for doing so and risking our lives. We can lump that into Bitcoin.
Dude, I will never be let back into this country if I do that. But I think here's a weird playbook. Here's a weird playbook that's been done by the US that could get followed right here. The Iran-Iraq war. The US was directly selling weapons to Iraq. It's part of the reason why Bush Jr. knew and said, oh, well, Iraq and Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction. Well, he knew that because Cheney was the one handling those deals back during the Iran-Iraq war. Now, at the same time that the US is selling weapons to Iraq directly, they are selling weapons to Nicaragua, earmarked to be sold to Iran. And they were literally, and I would be hard pressed to find information that didn't prove and show that they do it in more than just one instance. And if you're telling me they wouldn't just figure out a quick way to have Qatar call up the Iranian president, invite him over, have that conversation so it comes from the Middle Eastern bloc, but in reality, it's one of the US allies making these asks. I'm sorry, but I will be very interested to see who the newest supplier of oil is after or if Russia truly does get cut off from supplying the US with oil. Because I am promising you, I'm going to make this claim right now. It will probably still be Russian oil that's just coming through a middleman. There's always a premium when you invite the middleman in the picture. If we're complaining about the high price of oil and how we can't cut off Russia, but then turn around and introduce a middleman into the equation so it looks like, hey, we're above par. We're not, there's no Russian oil circulating here. It's just, these are plays from the playbook we've already seen. And I share these stories and analogies because it's not far-fetched to envision a world where they repeat some of these same plays over and over again. Now to tie it back to Bitcoin, this is exactly what Bitcoin was designed for, is to go around Swift. I sent a tweet out last week where when you really understand what Swift does and its capabilities and how it's used by the rest of the world on a global scale, you start to realize, oh, holy shit, This is literally what Bitcoin was designed to take down, if you will. And it's by no surprise that it was Putin, in my mind. Putin was the one who was speaking out for Bitcoin 2 weeks ago after the Russian finance ministry said, no, this is going to be detrimental to us. And then Putin is the one, not some other spokesperson from Russia, not a statement from Russia, but Putin himself. I don't know. All right, tinfoil hat comes off now.
I think that's a great point too, that the Bitcoin network is meant to replace the SWIFT system. And a lot of Bitcoiners have said this before, like the SWIFT system is the global settlement system for central banks and countries across the world. Bitcoin's base layer right now, yes, the fees are very low, but in times when things ramp up, the only ones that may be able to afford it in the future are big banks, central banks, corporations, or basically governments, global governments. Right now, I could send $5 to Q. I think if I wanted the medium transaction time, I don't have the mem.pool.space, but I know last night the high transaction was 3 sats per byte, medium and low were 1 sat per byte. So if I wanted to send $5 to Q on base chain, on the base layer of Bitcoin, it would be like, no more than like a few cents, a couple cents to do so if I wanted to wait at most an hour, in the quick sense, maybe 20 minutes, 10, 20 minutes. And that's without confirmations. I'm going to pull up this tweet right now that Q sent me earlier that kind of talks about how Bitcoin helps their citizens. So we talked about the SWIFT system and how we see it as moving forward in the future. This isn't going to happen right now and then, but on a global reserve currency of Bitcoin, I'd see the base layer as basically the SWIFT system, and everyone else in the future is going to be onboarded via Lightning. So people, banks, governments, or even people that have a lot of Bitcoin will basically open up Lightning channels, and they'll be able to transact at almost nearly feeless, without a fee to do so. So right now, the quote that I have up on screen, I'll read it out because it is a little small if you don't have it fully maximized. From Kyle Schneps at Go Bank Yourself. Happening now, Ukraine is using Bitcoin to defend its citizens from invasion and sustain its democratic way of life. Not happening now, Russia using crypto to avoid sanctions. Why does the media focus more on what is not happening than on what is happening? And Q, I know we're like, not to say that we're guilty of this, but everyone thought, they're going to get banned. Russia's going to get banned. So now they're going to use cryptocurrencies, mainly Bitcoin, in order to get around the SWIFT sanctions. Where we see the complete opposite, they're getting attacked by Russia. And now Ukraine is using it for their citizens to flee and to avoid sanctions. Are you all good there, Q? You just put in your contact.
I so appreciate you continuing that conversation because I was not ready to talk for a little bit. Yes, I live had to fix my contact, take it out and put it back in. So, I will push back on a little bit of that where, yes, the media is essentially turned the conversation around Bitcoin, especially mainstream media, around this idea of like, well, look, like Bitcoin helps Russia avoid this sanction and that sanction and all this to portray Bitcoin as bad. Here's the fucking truth. There was a tweet that Bitcoin Magazine sent out earlier today talking about how on-chain analytics show such a massive influx in 2 countries. And obviously it's Ukraine and Russia. Those 2 countries are massively seeing an influx of Bitcoin transactions more than anywhere else in the world right now. Makes sense. Bitcoin doesn't choose sides. That's the whole fucking point of it. It doesn't choose a side. It doesn't say, well, hey, I don't agree with the way you're doing this, so I'm going to cut off the funding coming to you, Justin Trudeau, you jackass. Or, hey, I actually agree with this, so I'm going to take all of the money that comes into you and actually funnel it secretly over to you. I don't know, Democratic National Party, assholes. But at the same time, like, it allows for the citizens in Russia who don't agree with this, who don't want this. Yes, we're seeing a bank run go on both in Russia and Ukraine right now, but you're also seeing a Bitcoin run. We are seeing for the first time a real life Bitcoin run happen in real time. And it kind of, I don't want to say it like this, but it is a historic, I'll say it like this. It is a historic event happening in real time to appreciate what a Bitcoin run looks like. I don't want to use the phrase bank run. I don't want to perpetuate this idea and the fear behind it, because there are people working very hard to make sure there is peace. And there is a majority of the world that wants to see peace. And for those reasons, I think calling this a Bitcoin run and the influx of money being spent towards Bitcoin, regardless of it being Ukrainians or Russians or however it's being done, I think it's of utmost importance. To tie it now back to the tweet that we're discussing, I think a lot of it is still valid for us to touch on, hey, if Russia is kicked out of SWIFT, what does that world look like? How does Bitcoin play its part in that scenario? It is valid to have that conversation. It's invalid. That's not a word. There's a movie that says invalid's not a word. I know that. I don't know why, but that literally. Anyways, it's also, I think it is not appropriate for the media to spend and harp on situations of what if. I hate the fucking what if game. Well, what if this scenario, and what if this? Tell you what, there are an infinite possible of what if scenarios. You can spend the rest of your life trying to figure it out, and I'm going to tell you what, the world is literally going to give you a scenario you didn't think about. So rather than trying to predict the future, let's interpret the present information that we have. And I think that's what I love about what we do here is we're not trying to forecast it. We're just simply trying to interpret the information that we have readily available to us.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to, and kind of going off that exact point that Bitcoin's apolitical, it really doesn't care. Here's the true sense of it. So I'm going to show a tweet on screen right now from Jesse Powell responding to Mikhailo Fedorov. He is a Russian diplomat. I am sorry, I just butchered his name, but he said, I'm asking all major crypto exchanges to block addresses of Russian users. It's crucial to freeze not only the addresses linked to Russia and Belarusian politicians, but also sabotage ordinary users. This is quite literally a Russian politician. I mean, if you want to talk about escalation of war, punishing the civilians for something that their governments or leaders have done is a step up of aggression, basically. So Jesse Powell, he runs Kraken's exchange. He's the CEO. I think his response is beautiful and elegant here. You know, I know a lot of people give Kraken flack because they're not a Bitcoin only company, but here's what Jesse's.
You mean you give Kraken flack for that company, you're a Bitcoin only company?
There, many Bitcoiners do as well. But anyway, so here's Jesse's response. I understand the rationale for this request. But despite my deep respect for the Ukrainian people, Kraken cannot freeze the accounts of our Russian clients without a legal requirement to do so. Russians should be aware that such a requirement could be imminent. And then he goes on to respond down below. So here's the next tweet. It's kind of a thread. So in that requirement could come from your own government. As we have seen in Canada, in response to protests, bank runs, and attempts to flee the country, it could come from foreign states like the US as a weapon to turn Russian populace against its government policies. For what it's worth, I would guess that the vast majority of crypto holders on Kraken are anti-war. Bitcoin is the embodiment of libertarian values which strongly favor individualism and human rights. In Canada, crypto was the only financial rail left for those who opposed the regime. And then he goes, I'm sorry, guys, it's a long thread, but we're almost over. Tweet number 4, our mission at Kraken is to bridge individual humans out of the legacy financial system and bring them into the world of crypto, where the arbitrary lines on maps no longer matter, where they don't have to worry about being caught in broad, indiscriminate wealth confiscation. Tweet number 5, sometimes the hardest thing about having power is knowing when to not use it. Our mission is better served by focusing on individual needs above those of any government or political faction. The people's money is an exit strategy for humans, a weapon for peace, not for war. And then his final tweet, which sums it up beautifully in my mind. Besides, if we're going to voluntarily freeze financial accounts of residents of countries unjustly attacking and provoking violence around the world, step 1 would be to freeze all US accounts. As a practical matter, that is not a really viable business option for us. End thread. Q, I know there's a lot to unpack there if you want to go off on that. Q is clapping right now. His mic's not picking it up though.
It's not. I literally unmuted just so I can clap again with the mic catching it. But Jesse, I've already asked you on Twitter if you are watching this or if one of his friends are watching this. Like, would love to have you on the show. Love to have you on the show long before you sent that thread. But it is you hit the. I'm gonna do it again, Chris, and it's gonna piss you off. But he hit the head on the nail. He's so right. He's so fucking right. I'm gonna make a movie analogy with a really bad movie. Don't hold it against me. I don't love this movie, but Star Wars Episode 8, the scene where they go into the casino and they're talking to the I forget the actor's name, very big name actor, but essentially they're sort of at this casino and they come to realize, like, wait, they've been selling weapons to both sides of the war. Let me tell you, as someone who used to work in Hollywood and was very close to the people at Lucasfilms, that was them literally calling out America for doing exactly that, for instigating violence all over the world. I think what Jesse said is very interesting, where, yes, there is a way to put pressure on the government by taking away the citizens' rights, abilities, access to information, access to money, whatever it may be. However, at the same time, look, it's different when, and I'm very excited. I'm not excited, but the two soccer nerds are going to be talking about the recent Russia FIFA ban that happened this morning. I think that's a more appropriate approach than cutting people's access to money off, because when you start doing that, you're affecting their livelihood. I can go a year without cheering for Arsenal. I can go a week without cheering for the Lakers. Like, that's just the simple truth. My life doesn't end because the Lakers suck. It's tough. Don't get me wrong. I cry myself to sleep most nights. Stan Kroenke, I watch you win a Super Bowl in LA. You better deliver for something over in London right now, right? But my life continues. If you told me that I don't have access to my bank account anymore, how am I paying my rent? How am I buying dinner? Like, that's a whole other ballgame. And I think that level of approach, is there, like, in my mind right now, off the top of my head, I don't think there's a scenario where it's acceptable for civilians to have their access to money and information be cut off by the rest of the world. I don't even think there's a scenario where it's just for a government to do that to their own citizens, and nor do I think anyone in the Bitcoin community would as well. But is there, in your mind, a scenario where it's justified for a foreign nation to act in such a manner, where we're witnessing war? This is as bad as it gets. I don't really understand or know of a situation where that type of action would be warranted.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, Bitcoin's apolitical for that reason. Do terrorists use Bitcoin? I'm sure they do. Do people that money launder use Bitcoin? Yeah, I'm sure they do. Do people that cause harm do it? But you know what the global reserve currency and the most used for money laundering, fraud, criminal activities is? It's the US dollar. It's cash fiat dollars. So, while people say Bitcoin is bad, it's definitely better than the US dollar. It's a lot better than the US dollar. And for a lot of the reasons that Q and I talk about on this show. I want to highlight one quick thing too. The first response that's shown, I missed this before, by Big Sky _Hodl. What's Jesse saying? Not your keys, not your coins. So he's poking fun at what Jesse said just a few weeks prior with the Freedom Convoy, saying that, like, he believes people should take self-custody of their coins, because basically what he was saying in that same thing, if a government or whatever set by law or a court says that he has to cut off Russia, he will be forced to do so, but he's not taking preemptive actions until he's forced to do so. I know many Bitcoiners get really caught up and pissed, but if a business wants to keep operating within the laws, if they don't, then they become, a criminal. I mean, many Bitcoiners see themselves already as criminals because of what we do and what we hold as an asset. But I think it's just a very important point. Go ahead, Q.
Absolutely. And it jogged my memory just now while you were talking that I cannot believe I didn't touch on this when we discussed China essentially going against what a lot of people expected their stance with Russia to be. And Vice Media. I'm going to just share my screen and share the headline because this is Vice. This is not The Onion. And I had to like triple check when I first saw it. But per Vice World News, the Taliban have called on Russia to show restraint in Ukraine. Yes, that Taliban, the same one that we were just talking about earlier in today's episode with Youssef from Built with Bitcoin and his home country of Afghanistan. Like, you are seeing a huge push from all over the world, from all different groups, condemning the actions of Russia. At this point, in my mind, you literally have worst case scenario where the whole world is against you, Russia. And even still, it is not appropriate to have a foreign nation go in and affect civilians in that country simply on the basis of, well, if we make them uncomfortable, then they'll make their politicians uncomfortable. They're plenty uncomfortable. Those who are aware of what's going on, at least, are those with internet access. Our colleague Alex McShane shared with us through various connections with his family that certain people that he knows over in Russia who maybe aren't as connected to the internet are not as aware of what's going on. The Russian media has been propagating a different storyline than what it's warranted, I think, to say it like this, the way Western media is propagating this. I mean, full disclosure, do not support or agree with any actions by Russia or Putin. But I do think it's important to recognize a lot of us are receiving our sources from Western media, and there is an angle to that. And there are also certain publications that we're learning out of Ukraine that aren't even real publications. I'm going to dive into that in a brief moment. But I want to share right now on the topic of what is being given to Russians, what access to information Russians have. Over the weekend, it was announced that Anonymous, that hacker group, shout out to them for selling us twitch.com/Bitcoin and all of the fam over at Twitch watching us. But they announced that they have hacked TSS, the Russian news media outlet, and they actually had broadcasted essentially a short PSA sharing what exactly is going on and what their country is doing. We're working on getting that translated, but I believe, Chris, do we have a link just to even share it or post the tweet real quick? Just go to Your Anon TV. That's their Twitter handle. It's pinned at the very top. It is all in Russian, but this is a PSA essentially to Russian citizens who are not aware of what's going on and what their country is doing. And I think that is also important because the more their own citizens learn about it, the more upset they become. It is a cutoff of information internally in their country that is really what's preventing more Russians from standing up against these actions. There's also misinformation coming out of Ukraine. I need to find, okay. I'm going to share my screen really quickly if we're ready for that. So this is a very interesting Twitter thread that I came across about a gentleman named Vladimir Bondarenko, a blogger from Kiev who does not exist, who was invented by a Russian troll farm, and his picture was made by AI. This is not the first time we've heard about Russian disinformation campaigns using AI and misinformation spread online. Whether or not you agree that they had anything to do with the 2016 elections, where there's smoke, there is fire. I do think that there is something to be said about the way Russia gets involved in social media to spread misinformation that aligns with or helps what they believe or helps their agenda. One of the key things I want to point out from this Twitter thread in particular is if you actually make a face on thispersondoesnotexist.com, which is an AI platform that helps generate faces, this weirdness in your ear, not seen in this ear, is a common mistake that AI algorithms make when creating a facial image like this. And this is another one of the members of this journalist group. I'm putting journalist in air quotes because the journalist does not exist. But as you see from this thread, and we will stop sharing, at this point, but there is a disinformation campaign coming out of Ukraine, and we need to be very, very careful about what sources we are trusting. I was a little hesitant about sharing that thread because I was not familiar with that journalist or his work. But I think it is still of the utmost importance. To be clear, he is a senior reporter for NBC News, which mainstream media are not legitimizes him, I think, at least in my mind, to trust that story that he was sharing with us. It's scary times where we really have reached that point in the internet age. You can't just trust anything you read. Oh, I read it on Twitter. Who is that person's source? What's their agenda? What do they benefit by saying this? I'll tell you this. Every time I tweet about Bitcoin, it's because I want Bitcoin to succeed. Maybe I selfishly want some more followers here or there, but at the end of the day, you have to be, in this day and age, super, super careful on where you are gathering information, because when you're drawing those conclusions, it's tough out there. That I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to the idea of the Russian misinformation campaign, both for their own citizens as well as beyond.
I mean, not to get all tinfoil hat here, but I mean, the US government does misinformation campaigns all the time. China does it, Russia does it. We're not the first, we're not the last. Even like small corrupt governments like Brazil or Argentina. And I say small governments that are corrupt. I mean, look at the US. It's not to poke fun at them. It's like all governments do this, especially the corrupt ones, which seems to be all of them. Yeah, there's definitely a benefit to lying and cheating in this fiat society that we live in. It's kind of hard to cheat and lie the system when you have Bitcoin as a base. And I'll just kind of leave it off on that. Anything else you want to add, Q? I have nothing else to add for the Ukraine-Russia stuff.
Well, I do want to dive in a little bit to go back now on the idea of putting pressure on citizens. Last week, the Czech Republic was one of the first countries to announce they refused to play Russia in the World Cup playoff match that they had scheduled. The U.S. men's and women's national teams for soccer made a similar announcement. A host of other countries came out in support of this message. We saw a Russian tennis player over the weekend. I don't know what tennis open is happening right now. Apologies for tennis fans out there. But he wrote on the camera, "No war, please." We're seeing messages all across the sports world, athletes who are scoring goals in soccer, showing signs like that. But I think this is huge that FIFA has come out and banned Russia from World Cup qualifying, essentially barring them from being a member of the next World Cup, attempting to win the World Cup. I think we're just going to call today the tinfoil hat, because I have a disgusting theory that I think is valid. But in 2018, Russia actually hosted the World Cup. Russia also made the deepest run in the World Cup that they have ever made in any World Cup. Now, this is actually very typical for a host country. You have the home fans, you have the home energy. You're sleeping in your own home. You know the people and the language going on. You're much more accustomed to what's going on, and you're not in that weird state of mind. Part of the reason I think why Korea made a semifinal run in 2002.
I want to talk to that one being Italian. They were definitely cheated by the refs, but that remains to be seen. Just watch the semifinal game where multiple people were given red cards on the Italian side and the South Koreans were nasty tackles. But to each his own. Go ahead, Q.
We're gonna have a long, healthy debate about how dirty Italian soccer is. But anyways, the World Cup is massive in so many ways. It teaches you about the cultures of other countries. It brings together at least 32, and now it's going to be 48 after this year's World Cup, 48 different nations. One of my favorite things, and you will see it in later this year's World Cup, when there's always one African country that is in the World Cup that is in the midst of a civil war. I feel terrible saying it like this, but it is true. I remember since 2006, this dialogue of conversation happens all the time. In 2006, it was Togo, where they bring up how this country is facing a civil war. However, news has spread that there is a ceasefire agreed upon for the 2 hours where this team's national team is playing in the World Cup, and they're just playing in a fucking group stage match. But it has such an impact to where they stop a fucking war for 2 hours so both sides can support this. The World Cup finals was watched by over 1.1 billion people. For context for you Americans, only 50 million people typically watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That is a
20x.
20x.
Yeah.
20x viewership.
It's a global sport too. And you think even when it's going on, I mean, a lot of times the games, sometimes they optimize for, or normally the final optimizes for a time that's best for everyone. But, you know, someone's watching the game at 4 a.m. when it comes down to it. You know what I mean? If you're watching it live, it's 4 a.m. or whatever time the host nations, you know, wherever it is, you know, someone's waking up early. Obviously, countries will host replays later on in the game if you were asleep for it. But yeah, it's truly a global event where people from around the world tune in to watch the World Cup final. Orders of magnitude bigger than the Super Bowl. And, you know, the US, we are very, I guess, egocentric and narcissistic, being like the Super Bowl, biggest event in the world. It's like, it's not even close, man. It even blows, I think, the Olympics out of the water, although the Olympics is obviously more watched than a lot of times than Super Bowls as well for specific. No, it's not. Oh, okay.
No,
My
it
apologies.
literally, last figures I saw was it genuinely goes the World Cup, then the Euro Cup, then American sports. Like that is how much of it. I actually think the Champions League goes above it too. So again, like US sports, like we are inundated with sports and in this culture. However, the sports we're inundated with don't even like measure on a global scale. And again, I cannot stress enough the nationalism and pride that comes out during the World Cup for people who visit, for people who are there, regardless of whether or not you agree with the idea or concept behind nationalism and all of the issues that brings up. I think it is important to recognize and show, like on the biggest global stage you can, you've essentially told this country that I'm very proud people, very prideful of their heritage, prideful of their history, and prideful of the accomplishments of their country, or you're just not allowed. You've been blacklisted. You were too drunk at the party and you can't come back to the club. And it's that is where I think I personally draw the line of what is actually acceptable to cut off from a country. Because while I may not necessarily agree with your perspective, your point of view, or what you are doing, I think for me to affect civilians' livelihoods, that is sort of the line that I'm not willing to cross. What to you would be sort of a next iteration of, okay, FIFA has banned Russia from the World Cup. What is the next iteration of this in your mind where, I mean, they have their own TV and film studios and projects, so they're not necessarily importing the latest Marvel films from us. They don't have, I don't believe they have Netflix. They have their own version of that, and they knocked off Disney. So
yeah, I guess in terms of sanctions, I mean, you know, I know Jason Lowry is part of the Space Force, just throwing his name around. I don't know if we'd start shooting Russian satellites out of the air, but if we do that, that's, you know, quite literally an act of war, but it's something that most people haven't considered. If we can't stop their internet locally by dropping bombs on electric stations or power plants, the next best thing, or, you know, next quote unquote, next best thing, but the next way to hurt Russia would be, if you're not going to literally attack them on land for power, it would be to taking out satellites in the air, but that's quite literally an act of war. And Russia would look for repercussions, you know, in whatever way they can. You know, I'd hate to see it go nuclear, but that could be a repercussion for doing so. And obviously, if that were to happen, no one's being like, oh, you know, it was the US, oh, maybe it was China, or maybe it's like kicking someone that, like, everyone would start blaming everyone. The US would say it was China. China would say, we have no knowledge of this. The US is just pandering. They could say, oh, maybe it was an accident, you know, it was a training accident in space. I don't know how it's been. I'm sure it could get a little crazy, but that's what I'd say. I also want to add to note, going back to the sports thing, El Clasico, 650 million on average watched that game. I think when Messi and Ronaldo, they thought it was probably their last time as well, was over 1 billion as well.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm a huge football nerd. I've won a lot of money in fantasy football. Fantasy football is the season for me, not football season. It's fantasy football season because I make money. And I still understand and respect the fact that, like, football, no one gives a fuck about football the moment you leave America. Now imagine if the sanctions that the US ever received from another country was no more Super Bowl. The Super Bowl must be played in a different country. Imagine the backlash. Okay, I don't want to make light of the situation or make light of this conversation. I do want to maybe share my screen. I just literally have Ukraine popped up on. No, that's not what I wanted. The search bar. And I just want to sort of populate down. I mean, one thing that I've seen that has been very beautiful is the outpouring of support for Ukraine from both people in this country as well as abroad. Shout out to the former Miss Ukraine, who is now actually fully in military gear. I did see that. Probably one of the most badass women out there right now. I mean, I don't frankly care for a lot of these takes. I just think it's a lot of people being hyperbolic, but as you can see, it's and it makes me question a little bit. Like, obviously, my Twitter feed is curated for me based on what I look and respond to and interact with the most. I'm curious if my Twitter feed shows me such an outpouring of support for Ukraine based on what I like versus based on how much, like what does that scale or what does that pie look like in relation to all of the tweets and comments and posts about Bitcoin, I mean, about Ukraine and Russia, and how much of it is pro-Ukraine versus how much is pro-Russia. I don't know if someone out there is able to congregate that or run an NLP script just to very quickly scrape Twitter at large, or if someone at Twitter is watching this, maybe run a quick NLP sentiment analyzer for pro and anti-Ukraine or pro and anti-Russia type of conversations. But I think that could actually be huge. If Twitter were to come out and publish and say, hey, 95% of the tweets that are populating our website right now are anti-Russia, after we're establishing that, hey, Russia sends out these bots and AI trolls essentially to put out misinformation. So even with the misinformation, they only have a 5% market share. Dude, literally the entire world fucking hates you. You are worse than Dr. Evil. Because like, at least Dr. Evil had like an ounce of good in him.
I have nothing really to add there. I agree, Q. Anything else that you want to add?
I was going to read an ad spot and I was like, this is not the right time to read the ad spot that you're supposed to read right now. So we will read this ad spot in a little bit when the conversation the dust settles from a lot of this Ukraine Russian talk. I would really love to not see this escalated. I loved Elon Musk's response over the weekend to, I believe it was a Ukrainian government official, essentially asking to point Starlink towards his country. Help us. We need more internet access. And what did Elon Musk do? Without hesitation, put him on the spot and he will respond. Dude gets a lot of flack, especially from the Bitcoiner community. And some of it I think is justified. I don't think all of it is though. I think one of the thoughts I had after seeing that thread and thinking about it a little bit, Elon Musk literally locks himself in a fucking room to work for 16 hours a day. He probably has like 5 assistants who are shuttling him to where he needs to go or getting him to focus on the meetings he has. But for the most part, the dude is just in his own world working. And when people come out and say, hey man, like, why don't you do this? Like, why don't you pay taxes? It would help us. His response was, okay, I'll pay some taxes. I'll pay the most taxes anyone has ever paid in the fucking world, if that's what you guys want. Oh, you guys need better internet in Ukraine? Fuck it. Here you go. Have all the internet you need. Let me know if you need anything else, but I'm going to go back to work now. I think that's the dude's MO, and I fucking love and respect it, man.
I'm sure his accountants were not too thrilled when they're like, you can just take out a loan against the Tesla stock that you have. Like, why are you going to sell it and cause a taxable event? And he's like, nah, fuck it. Twitter told me to do it. And his accountants are probably like, oh my God. All right. We're taking business advice from Twitter here. But I think that is kind of his MO. It's kind of like, F it, I'll do what I want.
Hey, man, I look forward to a day where I have $10 billion of fuck you money, and I will pay taxes on said fuck you money.
He paid 11 billion in taxes. That
No.
means that it was, yeah, like it's
No, that's what I'm saying. Like that
yeah,
to him, $11 billion is just fuck you money.
yeah.
You or I, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even.
It's a lot of freaking money.
Yeah. Okay. Now that I've numbed this down a bit, I will read this ad spot. Advancing Bitcoin Conference is taking place on March 3rd and 4th in London. It's a 2-day technical conference. Day 1 contains 15 talks and day 2 contains 7 hands-on workshops. Speakers include developers from Blockstream, Lightning Labs, Brink, as well as Bitcoin core developers such as Taj Dria, Jimmy Song, and Ruben Thompson. After the conference, there will be dinners, drinks, and social events where you can meet and network with other technical Bitcoiners. If you work for a Bitcoin company, you're looking for a Bitcoin job, looking to widen your network, or wanting to learn more about technical Bitcoin developments, this is the place to be. Find out more by visiting www.advancingbitcoin.com. But now back to, I think, us winding down today's episode and just this ongoing conversation and crisis in Ukraine. I mean, all we can do, I think, from here where we sit is pray that these people find peace quickly, continue to share what information we have. If those of you who are watching have other news articles or sources that are on the grounds out in Ukraine or even in Russia, feel free to DM any of us. Feel free to DM the Bitcoin Magazine video account. My personal Twitter account is always open to DMs. I do my best to go through them. We want to bring light to everything going on in a respectful way, and not choose sides, but show both what it's like for Russian citizens right now dealing with this in Russia and abroad. I saw the Finland prime minister spoke out against the actions of both the Russian government as well as any actions taken towards Russian immigrants in other countries. Those immigrants in other countries didn't do anything. Okay. And quite frankly, most people in Russia didn't do anything either. You know what? Actually, I think this is, again, I'm going to share this tweet. Oh, what's that fucking kid's name? Ow. Oh my God, I got to find this tweet, but there was a tweet I found. Maybe I'll just retweet it on my personal Twitter page. He translated a text from a Russian soldier sent to his mother, essentially saying, like, this is not what they told us we were walking into. They told us that we would be treated with parades and flowers, and we're being shot at, and I'm being told to shoot back. And I did not think I was going to kill someone on this mission. Like, even the Russian soldiers don't know what they're doing. There's so many reports about them being unaware of what they were walking into because they were not properly briefed. They were not expecting this. Again, how much of it I believe, I take it all with a grain of salt. Bold military strategy to send in troops unaware of what to expect when walking into hostile enemy territory. Nobody truly, I don't think, no, that's too hyperbolic. There's a minority of people who want this, but the vast majority would prefer peace and would prefer a quick and swift end to all of this. So to Putin, I ask just that because I know Papa Putin is out there watching Bitcoin Magazine live every Monday through Thursday.
Yeah, I'll just relay your same sentiments, Q. I think a lot of Russians didn't want this or even don't know that it's going on. Like I said, I've heard rumors that even there's just young boys that are leading the front lines for Russia, like 16-year-old, 17, 18-year-old kids. I mean, these kids even aren't full adults yet that were kind of told to go in. It's been hard to verify that, but I'm sure young kids that were recruited to do this and basically going on a suicide mission, like you said, that they didn't even know they were doing. My heart goes out to Ukraine and the losses that they have, as well as the Russian people. I won't say the Russian leadership, I'll leave them excluded, but I don't think anyone wants to see a World War III. No one wants to see this go nuclear. No one wants to see this escalate further. I wish there was a way that we can end this or resolve it more peacefully than what has already happened. We'll be still keeping an update on that part of the world, and our eyes will be there. I know that there's other geopolitical games that can happen with China and Taiwan, and things that are going on in Yemen, things that are going on in China, things that are doing more humanitarian crises around the world. Just because something happens in one part of the world doesn't mean that there is evil doesn't stop in other parts. So just want to keep an open mind about that. My thoughts and prayers go out to everyone in the world that's kind of suffering. So I'll just leave it at that. Q, if there's anything else you want to add before we send it off. All right. Well,
use code YTMAG, get 10% off. Come to Bitcoin 22. I really hope the world has peace. Come Bitcoin 22.
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you later.